The Iron Dragon of Britannia
Issei,
Act 1.
command
The weight
you
of
to
crimson
obey.
waves. Every empire that has ever fallen began the day it forgot
We will
what it meant
shatter
to be
this
human.
old world order.
Chapter 1. The Boy Who Dreamed of Fire. Ashford Academy, Area 11, Holy Britannian Empire. The dreams always came in crimson. Issei Hyoudou had long since learned not to flinch when the fire reached for him in the dark. He knew its texture intimately now, the way it breathed against his skin without burning, the way it coiled around his left arm like a second skeleton, patient and enormous and ancient beyond any language he had ever studied. He was 17 years old, and he had been dreaming of dragons since he was 4. He sat at the rear window of Ashford Academy's upper dormitory wing, and watched the lights of the settlement blink on in the violet dusk, one by one, like stars that had agreed to fall in orderly rows. Area 11. That was what Britannia called this place now. The word Japan had been surgically removed from official maps 7 years ago and replaced with a number, as though an entire civilization could be filed away inside a bureaucratic drawer and forgotten. He pressed his palm against the cold glass and thought about the number. 11. The light from the lamp behind him caught the faint tracery of veins along his arm, and for a moment, just a moment, they seemed to pulse red. Still brooding? He turned. Issei Hyoudou stood in the doorway, arms folded, wearing the Ashford uniform with the kind of effortless precision that made everything he wore look tailored. Where Issei had grown into his broad shoulders through obstinate stubbornness, Issei carried his height like he had always known what to do with it. He was one of the 3 people in this building that Issei trusted without reservation, and he had a habit of appearing precisely when Issei was thinking thoughts too large for a dormitory room. Not brooding, Issei said. Calculating. The difference being? Brooding produces nothing. Calculating produces a plan. Issei moved inside and let the door close quietly behind him. He had been among the 11s who had managed admittance to Ashford through the scholarship track, a program that technically existed to demonstrate Britannian generosity and practically existed to produce a small, photogenic class of 11s who could be pointed to whenever questions of imperial equity arose. Issei had arrived through a different channel entirely, and he was careful about who knew the precise nature of that channel. Student council meeting tonight, Issei said, picking up a textbook from Issei's desk and setting it back down. Millie is expecting everyone. I know. She'll send Shirley after you if you don't show. I know that too. A silence settled between them, the comfortable kind that 2 people build slowly over a year of shared proximity. Outside, a Britannian patrol craft hummed along the settlement perimeter, its searchlight threading between buildings. Issei watched it without expression. You heard about the Narita convoy? He said. Issei's expression shifted fractionally. The one the Black Knights hit. 3 Gloucester units. Command type. One of them was piloted by a junior officer from the Northampton family. Issei turned from the window. Britannia will respond. They always respond to Northamptons. The retaliatory sweep through Shinjuku is already being drafted. I've seen the patrol rotation changes. How? It was not a question precisely. Issei had long since understood that how was a category of inquiry that Issei would answer only partially, and on his own schedule. Information moves, Issei said. If you know where to stand, it moves toward you. He reached beneath the window seat and produced a folded sheet of paper, hand-copied, dense with patrol times and checkpoint coordinates. He slid it across the desk without ceremony. If the Black Knights are planning anything in the next 4 days, they need to know that the eastern perimeter at Shinjuku Block 7 will be understaffed on Thursday between 2 and 4 in the morning. I need that information to reach them. Issei stared at the paper. You're feeding intelligence to a resistance movement. I'm ensuring that civilians in Block 7 don't get caught in a retaliatory sweep that a competent patrol commander would have predicted and prevented. Issei paused. Yes. Same thing, Issei. I'm not asking you to carry it. I'm asking you to pass it to someone who will. Another pause. Outside, the patrol craft completed its loop and disappeared behind the dormitory tower. Issei looked at the paper for a long moment, then picked it up and tucked it inside his uniform jacket without another word. Issei turned back to the window. In the reflection of the glass, for just a moment, his left eye shone gold. The student council room at Ashford smelled of coffee and contested authority. Millie Ashford presided over it from the head of the long table with the serene confidence of someone who had decided, somewhere around the age of 12, that the universe would simply have to accommodate her schedule. She was blonde and sharp-eyed and terrifyingly perceptive in a way that she concealed behind a personality built from equal parts warmth and theatrical chaos. She was also, Issei had long since determined, at least twice as intelligent as she permitted most people to realize. He had been working out the architecture of that concealment for most of the past year, the way she softened inconvenient observations inside jokes, the way she redirected conversations that were heading somewhere dangerous. He recognized the technique because he used a version of it himself. "You're 4 minutes late," she announced as he slid into the seat beside Kiba. "I was calculating." "How charming!" "Shirley, take notes." Shirley Fenette, seated across the table with her red hair pulled back and her pen already moving, gave Issei a look of profound exasperation that he had come to understand was, in its own particular grammar, a form of affection. She had been exasperated with him since the 3rd week of the school year when he had corrected her geography essay's political analysis in the margins without being asked. They had been, and probably, something close to friends ever since. The rest of the council filled out around the table. Rivals Cardmond, who had the gift of finding most situations entertaining. Nina Einstein, who was brilliant in narrow channels and anxious everywhere else. And at the far end of the table, occupying the chair beside the window with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, a girl named Cece. No family name. No background that anyone could verify. She had appeared at Ashford 6 months ago with a transfer certificate from a school in the Euroland territories that Issei had spent 2 days researching and had concluded did not actually exist. She wore the uniform correctly and answered when spoken to and contributed nothing to any conversation that she was not specifically addressed in, and she watched Issei with green eyes that held an evaluation so clinical and unhurried that he sometimes felt like a problem she was not yet ready to solve. He watched her back. "Agenda item 1, Millie said, spreading her hands on the table with the air of a general deploying forces. "The cultural festival. We're behind on planning and I refuse to let the Ashford Festival become a historical footnote. Issei, you're chairing logistics. I'm aware. Your enthusiasm is staggering. Agenda item 2, the new photography club petition. Rivals, that's yours. Nina, the science display application is due Thursday. And last, the small matter of the Emperor's upcoming visit to Area 11. The temperature of the room changed. Emperor Charles Z. Britannia did not make casual tours of occupied territories. His appearances were theatrical in nature and designed to produce specific effects in specific populations. His last visit to Area 11 had been followed within 2 weeks by a political restructuring that had eliminated 3 11 district council seats. Enhanced security protocols, Millie continued, her voice maintaining its surface brightness while something more careful moved underneath it. The Academy grounds will be subject to Britannian military courtesy inspection in the week preceding. I'd like everyone to be aware of that. Particularly anyone who might have items in their rooms that could be misinterpreted by a junior officer with something to prove. She was not looking at Issei when she said it. He was fairly certain she was talking to him. Noted, he said. Cece made no expression at all. But under the table, her hand moved, and something small and flat slid across the seat's surface and disappeared into the fold of her skirt before anyone else had the angle to see it. Issei noted the movement, filed it, and returned his attention to Millie's briefing. Later, walking back across the courtyard in the dark, he found a folded note in his jacket pocket that he had not placed there. It read, "Tomorrow. The old railway track at the eastern edge of the settlement. Midnight. Come alone. You already know you should trust me." He stopped walking. He did know that. He did not know how he knew, but the certainty sat in his chest like a warm coal, immediate and sourceless and absolute. Above him, the stars of Area 11 were the same stars that had hung over Japan 7 years ago. They had not been renumbered. He appreciated that about them. His left arm ached faintly in the dark. Chapter 2, The Green-Eyed Witch and the Dragon's Child. The Eastern Railway, Settlement Perimeter. The old railway had been decommissioned when Britannia restructured Area 11's transportation infrastructure, rerouting the major cargo lines through Britannian-administered hubs and letting the original track fall into the kind of official non-existence that made it useful for precisely the sort of meeting that was happening now. Issei arrived 9 minutes early. Cece was already there. She sat on the rail with the composure of someone who had been waiting for a very long time and had made her peace with it long ago, her green hair catching the moonlight, her uniform jacket replaced by a dark coat that made her edges uncertain in the shadows. She was eating a slice of pizza from a folded wrapper, with the focused dedication of someone who considered this a serious undertaking. He stopped at a reasonable distance and looked at her. "You're early," she said without looking up. "So are you. I am always where I intend to be at the time I intend to be there." She took another bite. "It's one of the few genuine luxuries." "Who are you, Cece?" "I told you. That is not a name. That is a pair of letters. Names are a form of ownership," she said, folding the pizza wrapper with surprising care. "I find them presumptuous. Sit down, Issei Hyoudou. We have things to discuss that will take longer than your patience and shorter than my lifespan." He sat. Not because she told him to, but because standing seemed theatrical and he had never been interested in theater for its own sake. "You know about the left arm," he said. "I know about the entity in the left arm." She turned her head and looked at him directly for the first time, and the green of her eyes was strange in the moonlight, too clear, too still, the color of ancient glass. "His name is Drake. He is one of the 2 oldest dragon kings in recorded supernatural history. He has been resident in the sacred gear known as the boosted gear for several centuries, passed between hosts,
Issei,
and he has been waiting
command
in you
you
specifically
to obey.
since you were born." Issei was quiet for a moment. "You left out
We will
the part
shatter
where his
this old
previous
world
host
order."
was a devil king," he said. Cece's expression did not change, but something in her stillness shifted, the way a very precise instrument shifts when it detects an unexpected variable. "You know about the Underworld. I've been having the dreams since I was 4. Eventually you start doing research." He looked at his left hand, flexing the fingers slowly. "The supernatural aristocracy. Devils. Fallen angels. The great Satans. Rias Gremory and her kind, reigning over their raiding games and treating entire bloodlines like property." He lowered the hand. "Yes. I know about them." "Then you understand what I'm about to offer you." "I understand what a Geass is," he said. "I understand that you are a Geass contractor. I understand that in exchange for granting me a power I am apparently suited for, you want something in return, and that the something is usually connected to the concept of death." Cece looked at him with an expression that was, for the first time since he had observed her, something adjacent to surprise. "You've been reading," she said. "I told you. Information moves toward me." He met her gaze steadily. "Tell me what you want. Specifically." "I don't sign contracts without complete terms." She was quiet for 3 seconds, which in his experience of her was the equivalent of a long deliberation. "I want to die," she said. "Eventually. When everything is finished. I want someone to grant me that, and I cannot die at my own hand, and the power I carry is also a curse, and I have been waiting for the right person to take it from me and use it well enough that the world on the other side of the using is worth having died for." She paused. "That is the specific thing." Issei said nothing for a moment. "You've been alive a very long time. An embarrassing amount of time, yes. And you've made this offer before. To one other person, yes. How did it go?" "He accomplished extraordinary things." Her voice carried something that was not quite grief and not quite pride, some emotion that had been worn smooth by long familiarity. "He also made choices at the end that I disagreed with. I am hoping you will choose differently." Issei looked up at the stars. They were the same stars. They had not been renumbered. "The supernatural aristocracy," he said slowly. "The great Satans and their peerage system. The raiding games. The entire edifice. That's what you want to pull down. Not destroy," she said carefully. "Replace. There is a difference. Destruction leaves a vacuum. Replacement requires a better structure already built. A revolutionary position. I prefer strategic." He looked at her for a long moment. In the distance, a train moved along the Britannian cargo line, its lights threading through the dark in a neat, obedient row. "The Geass," he said. "What kind?" Absolute command. The ability to issue any order to any person and have it obeyed. Irresistible. One use per person. Requires eye contact. That's a dangerous thing to put in anyone's hands. Yes. You're trusting my restraint. I've watched you for 6 months, Cece said. You've had 17 opportunities to use information you possess to personally benefit at the expense of others. You used none of them. That is a form of data. She extended her hand, palm up, in the moonlight. I'm trusting your architecture, Issei Hyoudou. The way you think. The way you build. The way you consider, very carefully, before you act. He looked at her hand. Drake, the vast old consciousness wound around his arm, had been silent for this entire conversation. Now, in the deep wordless language that had existed between them since childhood, a single pulse of warmth moved through the sacred gear. Not agreement, precisely. Acknowledgement. This is real, the pulse said. She is what she says she is. Issei took her hand. The world went absolutely white. When it came back, something had changed in his left eye. He could feel it, a door that had always been locked now standing open, power pulled behind it like water behind a dam, vast and patient, and waiting for the precise moment when he chose to let it move. Cece was watching him from a few feet away, her hand at her side, the same ancient, weathered expression on her face. Well, she said. Welcome to the longer war. I have conditions, he said immediately. Of course you do. No Geass used for personal convenience. No compulsion of anyone who could be persuaded. Every command reviewed against the question of whether it could be undone, and if not, whether the irreversibility is justified by what follows. He met her gaze. And you work with me. Not for me. You have 4 centuries of intelligence, and I will not waste it by treating you as anything other than a full partner. Cece was quiet for a moment. I told you, she said. Architecture. Above them, the stars of Area 11 burned on, patient and uncountable, illuminating the first night of what would eventually, in the accounts that came after, be called the Crimson Rebellion. Chapter 3. The Shape of a Better War. Ashford Academy grounds and Shinjuku Ghetto. The next 2 weeks passed in the rhythm of ordinary school days and extraordinary nights. Issei had always been good at compartmentalization. It was, he reflected, a skill with dark roots if you examined it too carefully. The ability to move through a dining hall making light conversation while simultaneously tracking 3 separate lines of intelligence activity was not the product of a healthy childhood. He had long since decided that dwelling on the roots was less useful than tending the branches. The Student Council Festivals Committee met on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He showed up. He contributed logistical breakdowns that were significantly more detailed than required and that saved Shirley approximately 4 hours of work that she acknowledged with a look of surprised gratitude that he found disproportionately satisfying. Millie, who noticed everything, said nothing about the intelligence in his scheduling work. She simply began routing more of the difficult problems in his direction with the look of someone quietly updating a mental ledger. In the evenings, after curfew, he met Cece. They worked at a folding table in the basement of the East Dormitory Storage Annex, a room that existed in a convenient administrative gap between 3 different facility management systems, and that Issei had confirmed was not on any regular inspection schedule. Cece brought maps. He brought everything else. The Black Knights, he said on the 4th evening, spreading a handwritten analysis across the table. Zero's organization. What do you know about their structure? Decentralized command, strong central figurehead, currently operating through small cell networks in Shinjuku and 2 secondary locations. Cece regarded the map with the calm of someone reading a familiar text. Zero is operationally competent and charismatically exceptional. He is also working from incomplete information about the supernatural dimension of Area 11's political situation. The devil families with landholdings here. 3 Mitter lineages with interests in the settlement's financial architecture. They don't operate openly, but their investments run through at least 7 Britannian banking structures. If Britannia is removed and Zero installs an 11 governing body without accounting for those interests, they will simply redirect their support toward whatever destabilizing force is most convenient. So the political liberation and the supernatural extraction are the same problem. They have always been the same problem. The great Satan families have spent 3 centuries using human political upheaval as a management tool. Create instability, allow human factions to weaken each other, purchase influence with the winner. Her voice was perfectly level, but the weight behind it was enormous. Rias Gremory does not personally authorize territorial violence. She doesn't need to. The structure does it for her. Issei stared at the map for a long moment. Then the target is the structure, he said. Yes. Not Zero. Not Gremory. Not any individual piece. The architecture of supernatural control over human political outcomes. That is the only target worth hitting, Cece said. Everything else is maintenance. He was quiet, tracing lines on the map with one finger, not drawing them, just following the shape of what was already there. 3 days ago, through Kiba, he had passed the second set of coordinates to the Black Knights, covering a supply route that Britannian logistics had inadvertently left exposed during the pre-deployment shuffle for the Emperor's upcoming visit. He had not introduced himself. He had not indicated origin. He had simply provided information that, if the Black Knights were half as competent as their track record suggested, they would recognize as precise and actionable. He was building trust by demonstrating value before making any ask. It was the only honest way to build it. There's a girl, Cece said, apropos of nothing that the conversation had covered. He looked up. She flies a Sutherland for the Britannian forces, Cece continued, unfolding a second document. Cornelia Lee Britannia's unit. Her name is Valletta Nu. She is aware of the supernatural presence in the settlement, but has been directed not to pursue it. She is also, currently, deeply dissatisfied with the parameters of that directive. You're telling me she's a potential ally. I'm telling you she is a variable that will either become an asset or a problem, and that you have a narrow window in which those two outcomes are still separable. Cece slid the document across the table. She will be at the Britannian Officer Social event at Settlement Hall in 5 days. You have the access credentials from your scholarship documentation. You want me to recruit a Britannian Nightmare pilot. I want you to have a conversation with someone who is already looking for a different answer. What you do with that conversation is your architecture. Issei looked at the document. The photograph attached to it showed a tall woman with dark skin and close-cropped hair, wearing the red and gold of Cornelia's personal guard with the self-possession of someone who had earned every element of that uniform and knew it. She's going to be suspicious of a 17-year-old scholarship student with no obvious angle, he said. Yes, Cece agreed. You'll have to be genuinely interesting. I suggest honesty, within careful parameters. People in Valletta Nu's situation have been lied to so comprehensively, and for so long that the partial truth functions as a significant tactical advantage. He picked up the document, and looked at the photograph for another moment. One conversation, he said. That is usually how they begin, Cece said. In his arm, Drake shifted, and the warmth that moved through the boosted gear was something that Issei had learned to interpret over 17 years of residency. Not approval, precisely. Anticipation. The dragon in his blood had been waiting a long time for someone to finally start building the right kind of fire. Chapter 4, Settlement Hall.
I,
Britannian
Issei,
Officer
command
Social,
you to
Area
obey!
11. Settlement Hall had been designed to perform the sensation of
We
empire
will shatter
without
this
any
old
of its
world
costs.
order!
The architects had understood their brief with the particular clarity that comes from understanding exactly who is paying for what. High ceilings to imply grandeur. Warm lighting to imply welcome. Art on the walls selected for visual authority rather than merit. Large canvases in gold frames depicting Britannian military victories. The subjects rendered in heroic proportions and uncomplicated expressions. A bar along the far wall stocked with things that were expensive and a string quartet in the corner playing things that were inoffensive. Issei moved through it in the scholar's dress uniform that Ashford issued for official functions, the dark blue with the silver trim that marked him as a Leva-born and academically honored in the same breath, a combination that produced a very specific kind of invisible. Too elevated to be openly dismissed. Too flagged to be fully included. The social equivalent of a chair pushed to the edge of the room. He was counting on that. He found Valletta Nu at the outer edge of a conversation involving 2 junior officers and a Britannian civilian administrator. She was doing what Cece had predicted, listening with professional attentiveness, contributing with professional precision, and looking, to eyes that had practiced this particular observation, like someone who was present in body only. He moved to the bar and ordered water, because he wanted to be able to think clearly, and because it placed him at an angle to her position that made eventual eye contact natural rather than engineered. Then he waited. The conversation she was in dissolved after 4 minutes when the civilian administrator was collected by a spouse. The junior officers drifted toward the buffet. Valletta Nu remained where she was, holding a glass she had not drunk from, looking at the Britannian victory paintings with an expression that Issei, across the room, catalogued as something very close to private contempt. Interesting. He crossed the room without hurry and stopped beside her, following her gaze to the nearest canvas. The Battle of Narita is going to be in one of these eventually, he said. Not to her, not quite, but positioned so that she could choose to take it up. A pause. She looked at him from the side of her vision. You're the Hyoudou scholarship student, she said. Ashford. Yes. Is that a problem? It's an observation. She returned her gaze to the painting. What do you know about Narita? I know that 3 Gloucester units were destroyed and that the retaliatory sweep through Shinjuku last week found nothing because the people it was looking for had already been warned. He kept his voice entirely conversational. I know that whoever gave that warning had access to patrol rotation data that should not have been available through any civilian channel. I know that you were part of the assessment team afterward and that you filed a report suggesting the information leak was internal. Valletta Nu turned and looked at him fully. Her eyes were sharp and professionally dangerous in the way of someone who had learned to read threat levels quickly. That report was classified, she said. Yes, he agreed. How? Information moves towards certain kinds of attention. He met her gaze without flinching, without the slightly lowered eyes that the social architecture of the room expected from an 11 in conversation with a Britannian knight. I'm not an intelligence risk. I'm a 17-year-old student who finds things out, and more importantly, knows what to do with what he finds. Which is what? That depends entirely on what needs doing. He paused. You know about the supernatural presence in this settlement. You know that some of what happens here, some of the political outcomes that seem inexplicable by ordinary analysis, are being shaped by interests that don't appear in any official file. You were ordered not to pursue that line of inquiry. You find that directive frustrating. She was very still. You're describing insubordination, she said. I'm describing accurate observation. He let a breath pass. I'm not here to recruit you to anything tonight. I'm here to tell you that there is a longer analysis available. One that accounts for variables that your current command structure is either unaware of or has chosen to ignore. And that I would like, at some point that is convenient for you, to share that analysis with you. He took a small card from his jacket pocket, plain, handwritten, a contact address only. No commitment involved. Information only. She looked at the card. She did not take it. You're 17, she said. Yes. You speak like you're 40. I'm told that frequently. It's not a compliment. I know. He set the card on the cocktail table beside her and picked up his water glass. Enjoy the evening, Lieutenant Nu. The quartet is about to play something significantly better than what they've been assigned. He moved away. Behind him, after a moment, he heard the small sound of a card being picked up. He did not allow himself to smile until he had crossed to the other side of the room. Outside, in the courtyard, Cece was leaning against the wall in her dark coat, watching the stars with the focused patience of someone who had watched a great many. Well? She said without turning. She took the card. Of course she did. A pause. You were honest with her. Partially. As promised. She pushed off from the wall. Come. There's a message from Zero's network. He wants to know who has been feeding him coordinates. Issei stopped walking. He wants to know, he said slowly, or he wants to meet. Cece looked at him with something that might, on a longer acquaintance, be called approval.
Issei,
Both, she said.
Command you
Chapter
to obey.
5-0. Undisclosed location, Shinjuku. Zero
We will
was
shatter
taller
this
than
old
Issei
world
had
order.
imagined. He stood at the center of a repurposed warehouse space that the Black Knights had converted into something between a command center and a staging area. Maps on the walls, communications equipment on folding tables, 4 armed operatives positioned at the corners of the room with the practiced casualness of people who were very good at their jobs and wanted you to know it. The black armor and the theatrical purple mask were exactly what the newsreels showed. The posture inside them was something the newsreels had not quite captured, the specific quality of absolute self-certainty held in absolute stillness. Issei had dressed plainly. No Ashford uniform. Dark civilian clothes, nothing that marked territory. Cece stood beside him in her coat, which she had worn buttoned to the throat, and she had her eyes on the walls rather than Zero, cataloging exits with the efficiency of reflex. You fed us Shinjuku Block 7, Zero said. His voice through the vocoder was modulated and careful. And the Eastern Supply Route. Both were accurate. Both came with Zero verification trail. He let that sit for a moment. I don't enjoy unknown variables in my network. Then let me become a known one, Issei said. A pause. One of the corner operatives shifted fractionally. Issei tracked the movement without looking at it. You're a scholarship student from Ashford. Among other things, yes? Who are you to the Resistance? Currently, no one. Potentially, someone worth consulting on the part of your operational picture that you're missing. Zero's masked gaze rested on him. And what part is that? The supernatural dimension of Area 11's political economy. Issei kept his voice entirely matter-of-fact. You understand Britannian power structures well. You understand colonial administration, military logistics, the political psychology of the nobility. You do not fully understand the interest groups operating underneath that structure, the ones that have been using Britannian colonial policy as a management instrument for their own purposes. If you pull Britannia out of Area 11 without accounting for those interests, your independent Japan will be contested within 5 years by forces you have no framework for. Zero was quiet for a long time. Supernatural, he said. The word was not disbelieving. It was considering. The great Satans, Cece said quietly. It was the first time she had spoken since entering the room. The peerage system. The rating games. The fact that 3 devil lineage families hold financial interests in this settlement through proxy structures that survive any change of human government. She held Zero's masked gaze without particular effort. I have been navigating these structures for a considerable time. I can provide documentation. Who are you? Zero said. Someone who has been waiting for a configuration of people capable of solving the full problem, she said. And I am willing to share everything I know with anyone serious about solving it completely. Another long silence. Zero moved to the central table, a single step, and the 4 corner operatives relaxed precisely the degree that someone who had not been watching them would not have noticed. Issei noticed. What do you want? Zero said. Specifically, coordination, Issei said. Not command. I am not asking to join your organization or take any role in it. I'm asking to be the person you call when an operation is about to run into something you didn't know was there. I'll provide intelligence. I'll provide analysis. I'll provide, in specific circumstances that I'll define when they arise, operational support that goes beyond what conventional Black Knight assets can manage, in exchange for a seat at the table when the long-term political architecture of a liberated Japan is being designed. Specifically, the provisions that account for supernatural influence on civilian governance. Nothing else. Zero turned to Cece. You vouch for him? I have confidence in his judgment, she said. Which is a more meaningful thing than a vouch. The silence stretched. Outside, distant, the city made its nighttime sounds. The person at Ashford who has been leaking patrol data, Zero said finally. That was you. Yes. You've been doing it for 3 months without making contact. Why now? Because 3 months of demonstrated accuracy without any ask establishes a credibility baseline that this conversation would otherwise have taken 6 months to build. Issei looked at the masked figure across the table. You needed to know I was reliable before you needed to know I existed. Now you know both. Zero looked at him for a long moment. Suzaku, he said, to no one visible. A door at the back of the warehouse opened. A young man entered, slightly built, brown-haired, with the kind of physical precision in his movement that came from serious combat training. He wore civilian clothes but moved like someone who had recently been wearing armor. He looked at Issei and said nothing. Issei looked back. My knight, Zero said. He will be your contact point for operational coordination. If you have information, it goes through him. If we have questions, they come through him. A pause. I want to understand the supernatural structure you're describing before anything else moves. Full briefing. Can you provide that? Within the week, Issei said. Then we have a tentative arrangement. Zero moved toward the door. One more thing. You said
Issei,
operational support
command
beyond
you to
conventional
obey.
assets. What does that mean specifically? Issei
We
lifted
will
his
shatter
left
this
hand
old
slightly,
world order.
just enough. In the warehouse's dim light, the faint tracery of the boosted gear's housing moved beneath his skin, a shadow of crimson scales. It means, he said, that when you run into something that your nightmares can handle, I can be the thing that handles it. Zero stopped walking. After a moment, he continued to the door. Within the week, he said, without turning back. For the briefing. Outside in the dark, walking back toward the settlement proper, Issei matched Cece's pace and said nothing for a long time. He recognized the gear, Cece said eventually. Zero recognizes many things, Issei said. He's been doing this longer than his public profile suggests. You like him. I respect the architecture of what he's built. That's not the same as liking. He paused. He's going to need a reason to trust that I'm not a competing interest. That will take longer than one meeting. It usually does. I know. He looked up at the sky, the settlement lights reflecting off low clouds, the stars invisible from this angle. But it started. That's the part that matters. Chapter 6, Drake Speaks. Ashford Academy, late night. It happened on a Tuesday. Issei had been in the middle of analyzing a satellite image of the Britannian military installation at Narita when the warmth in his left arm shifted quality, deepened, became something that was not ambient presence but deliberate communication. He set down his pencil. He waited. Partner. The voice did not come through his ears. It arrived fully formed inside his understanding, rich and immense, carrying the subterranean timbre of something that had been breathing since before human civilization had learned to mark time. He had heard it before, fragments, impulses, emotional colors, but never words. Never actual language. He was careful not to show surprise. On the other side of the room, Cece was reading from a folder of documents she had produced from somewhere that Issei had not identified, and she did not look up. Hello, he said quietly. A pause. The weight of the presence in his arm settled, immense and oddly tentative, like something enormous negotiating a narrow passage. You've been using the left arm correctly, Drake said. Most hosts reach for me like a weapon. You've been using me as a measurement. The power isn't useful if it breaks everything it touches. Issei kept his voice low. I needed to understand the shape of it before I tried to apply it. 17 years. Most hosts last 3. 17 years of learning the edge cases. He flexed his fingers slowly. Why now? Why words? Because the situation has become real enough to merit it. Another pause, vast and considered. You're building something. Not just a resistance operation. Not just an intelligence network. You're building a framework. I have not seen a host think in frameworks before. Is that relevant to you? I have spent, Drake said, and the weight in his voice was geological, several centuries being used as a blunt instrument by people who thought power was something you pointed at problems. You are the first host who has made me feel like a collaborator rather than a tool. A long breath, resonant in the bones. I am choosing to be available for that collaboration. Actively, not passively. Issei was quiet for a moment. What can you do that I don't currently know about? The boosted gear doubles your power at fixed intervals. You know this. What you don't know is that the doubling is not limited to physical parameters. Analytical processing. Spatial awareness. Pattern recognition. The scale of what can be doubled grows with the complexity of what you ask it to amplify. A warmth ran through his arm, deep and steady. In a nightmare frame, the frame's mechanical output doubles. Its sensor range doubles. Its tactical processing doubles. You would be, in a properly configured unit, something that the existing nightmare doctrine has no category for. I've been thinking about the nightmares, Issei said. I know. You've been acquiring technical specifications for 3 months. The Black Knights are working with salvaged units. Sutherland's mostly. 1 or 2 Glasgow's. They're outgunned by anything Cornelia deploys because Britannian technical superiority in frame design is real. He tapped the satellite photograph. What they need isn't more units. They need a qualitative shift. Something that makes a Sutherland capable of fighting a Gloucester on even terms. The boost, Drake said. If I'm in a frame during combat, the doubling affects the frame's performance. Yes. And if the frame is properly modified to channel that doubling, the effect propagates. It is not simply your frame that benefits. The tactical coherence of units you are directing improves because you are improving. A command multiplier. A dragon's command multiplier, Drake said, and there was something dry in his voice, the first humor Issei had ever heard from him. Which sounds more frightening, admittedly. Issei almost smiled. Across the room, Cece turned a page without looking up. He's been waiting for you to ask the right questions, she said. He told me so 3 weeks ago. You've been in contact with him? Loosely. The Geass and the Sacred Gear are not entirely unaware of each other. We've been circling the same contractor for 17 years. She turned another page. He's less sentimental about it than I am.
Command you
I find
to obey.
That charming. I am not sentimental about anything, Drake confirmed.
We will shatter this
I
old world
observe
order.
That this particular convergence is statistically improbable, and therefore worth taking seriously. Agreed, Issei said. He looked at the satellite photograph. Narita. The Britannian installation there was a regional command hub. It was also, according to the intelligence he had been quietly building for 3 months, the location through which one of the 3 Devil lineage financial interests routed its proxy investment communications. Pull the Britannian installation, and that routing structure became visible. Visible, it could be documented. Documented, it could be presented to Zero as the proof of the analysis he had offered. 1 operation. 1 node. Carefully designed so that the Black Knights got the military victory they needed, and he got the intelligence architecture he needed. Drake, he said. Partner, I need you to help me think through a nightmare modification. Specifically, what a Sutherland would need to channel the boost efficiently enough to function as a command unit in a high-intensity engagement. A long, warm pause. I thought you would never ask, Drake said. Chapter 7, The Pilot and the Plan. Ashford Underground and Black Knight Forward Base. The leaden new appeared at the address on the card 9 days after Settlement Hall. She came at night, in civilian clothes, alone. She had done counter-surveillance on the way, or at least attempted it. Issei had been watching the approach for 40 minutes and had noted the 2 route changes and the 30-minute pause at a coffee vendor that she had used to see if anyone held position. She was good. She was also clearly unused to operating without institutional support, and the small hesitations in her tradecraft showed it. He met her at the door of the storage annex and led her down to the basement without preamble. Cece was not present. She had understood, without being told, that this first meeting needed to be smaller. Valletta stood in the lit basement, and looked at the maps on the walls and the analysis sheets on the table with the expression of someone who had walked into a room significantly more serious than they had braced for. You're running an intelligence operation, she said. I'm running an analysis operation. The distinction matters. From a school dormitory storage room. It has adequate space and is not on any inspection schedule. He gestured to a chair. Please, she sat, but with the posture of someone who was not committing to sitting. He sat across from her, and did not begin with anything small. The Selim Group, he said. Named entity in 3 Britannian banking structures. Registered as an investment vehicle out of the Euroland territories. You will not find it in any military intelligence file because the decision was made, at a level above your chain of command, not to look at it. The letter was very still. The decision was made, she said, because whoever looked at it first came back saying there was nothing there, or because whoever looked at it first was subsequently not interested in looking further. The latter. Specifically, a major in settlement intelligence who was transferred to a posting in the Britannian mainland 6 months after beginning that inquiry. He slid a file across the table. That's the transfer order, the original inquiry report, and the entity registration for the Selim Group, cross-reference with 3 property transactions in the settlement's financial district. She opened the file. He let her read. He had learned that people needed to hold information in their hands before they could begin to believe it, and that any attempt to accelerate that process by explaining produced defensiveness rather than understanding. 4 minutes. These property transactions, she said. They predate the Area 11 campaign by 2 years. Someone was buying in before Britannia invaded. Someone was building a position for after Britannia invaded, he said. There's a difference. Buying before invasion is speculative. Structuring the position to survive any human political outcome, Britannian, 11, or otherwise, that's strategic. Whoever is behind the Selim group was not betting on Britannia winning. They were ensuring that it did not matter who won. Valletta closed the file. She looked at the wall maps without focusing on them. You said supernatural, she said. At Settlement Hall. Yes. I want to understand what that word means in this context before I go further. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. The question was always the same. How much reality could someone absorb before the familiar world cracked, and what happened to their usefulness when it did? Devils, he said, are real? They are organized. They have a hereditary aristocracy, a territorial system, and an economics built around the cultivation of human populations as a source of political and spiritual influence. The Selim group is a proxy vehicle for one of 3 mid-tier devil families with territorial interests in what used to be Japan. He paused. They are not omnipotent. They are not incomprehensible. They are a power structure, and like any power structure, they have dependencies, vulnerabilities, and an interest in maintaining the conditions under which their advantages function. Valletta looked at him for a long time. You believe this, she said. I know this. He reached over and turned the satellite photograph so it faced her. The Narita installation. This is where the Selim group routes its communication through its Britannian proxies. If I can document what moves through that node, I can produce a complete picture of the supernatural interest structure in Area 11. That documentation becomes leverage.
I, Issei,
not for
command
violence,
you to obey.
for political architecture, for making sure that any governance structure that succeeds Britannian administration here is not immediately captured by the same interests that have been running this game for 3 centuries. She looked at the photograph. The Black Knights are planning an operation at Narita. I know. You're going to be part of it. I'm going to make it succeed in a way that produces more than a tactical win. Silence. Why me? She said. Specifically? Why are you showing me this? Because you fly a nightmare and you're dissatisfied, and you are, if I've read correctly, someone whose actual loyalties are to something more fundamental than the institutional color you currently wear. He met her gaze. I'm not asking you to betray Britannia. I'm asking you to consider whether the Britannia you are loyal to is the same as the one that transferred a major for asking inconvenient questions. She held his gaze for a long time. Her hands were flat on the table. Her expression was the kind that contained multiple things at once. You need a pilot, she said finally. I need several, eventually. Right now I need someone who can tell me what a modified Sutherland command unit would require in terms of hardware adjustment to run a doubled output power configuration without frame failure. That's not possible. The Sutherland's power distribution system can't handle that load. Not in its current configuration. She stared at him. You're talking about a fundamental reengineering of the power management architecture. I'm talking about a specific modification to the distributor coupling and the energy filler bypass that would allow a controlled surge input to propagate through the frame's actuation system rather than overwhelming it. I've sketched it. He slid another sheet across the table. I need a qualified pilot engineer to tell me if I've made any errors. She picked up the sheet and looked at it. 30 seconds of silence. Where did you learn frame engineering? She said. Books, mostly. Some conversations. A lot of applied spatial reasoning. He watched her read. Are there errors? Valletta turned the sheet over, read the back, turned it again. Her expression had shifted. The assessment she had walked in with, the careful skepticism of a professional evaluating a very young unknown quantity, had acquired a new layer that Issei recognized as the particular surprise of someone encountering competence they had not expected. 2, she said. Here and here. She tapped the sheet. And this section would need redundancy built in. Single point failure on the bypass would be catastrophic mid-engagement. Show me, he said, and slid a pencil across the table. She caught it. For the next 2 hours, in the basement of an Ashford Academy storage annex, a 17-year-old scholarship student and a Britannian Nightmare pilot who had not yet decided what she was loyal to redesigned the power management architecture of a Sutherland-class frame from first principles. Outside, the city of the settlement breathed in the dark. Above Narita, the stars that were not stars moved in their patient circuits. Something that had been building for a long time was about to become something else entirely. Act 2. The Architecture of Fire. You do not defeat an empire by matching its strength. You defeat it by becoming something it has no name for. Chapter 8. Iron and Calculation. Ashford Academy Underground Workshop, 2 weeks before Narita. The frame arrived in pieces. Valletta had spent 3 days acquiring them through channels that Issei did not ask about and that she, with the particular professionalism of someone who had learned early that deniability was a form of armor, did not describe. The components came in 5 separate shipments, each routed through a different logistics chain, each individually unremarkable. A replacement actuator assembly. 2 energy filler casings marked for disposal. A distributor coupling listed as salvage from a decommissioned unit. A control yoke that existed in the base inventory of exactly no official Sutherland maintenance depot. Together, in the low-ceilinged space beneath the east dormitory that Issei had been quietly expanding for 6 weeks using a structural diagram he had memorized from the original Ashford Academy building plans, they were a Sutherland-class Nightmare frame. Incomplete. Modified. Wrong in ways that would have alarmed any Britannian frame technician who knew what they were looking at. Exactly right in ways that Valletta knew was only beginning to understand. She stood in the center of the space with her arms folded and watched Issei work with the expression she had been wearing consistently since their second meeting. The look of someone whose model of a situation had already been revised 3 times and was bracing for a 4th. "Walk me through the bypass sequence again," she said. He did not stop what he was doing, tightening the coupling housing with the careful attention of someone who had watched 6 tutorial recordings and then practiced the motion until it felt like muscle memory rather than study. The Sutherland Standard Distributor System is designed around a load ceiling of 140% of rated output. It can sustain spikes to 160 before the thermal overrides engage. The modification relocates the override threshold calculation from the primary control system to a secondary loop that I've set to monitor output rate rather than output level. He secured the coupling and moved to the next junction point. The boost doesn't produce a sustained output increase. It produces a sudden doubling at a specific interval. Standard override systems see that as a catastrophic spike and cut power to protect the frame. The secondary loop sees it as a rate event and adjusts distribution in real time instead of cutting. Obey. The frame still has to absorb the double load for 11.3 seconds per boost cycle, after which the load returns to baseline while the next cycle accumulates. He stood and looked at the coupling junction. The actuator assembly we're using is rated for military-grade heavy Nightmare. It was designed to handle Gloucester-level output. In a Sutherland chassis it has significant headroom. Valletta moved to look at the junction herself, pulling a small light from her jacket pocket and examining the housing. 2 seconds. "That's actually elegant," she said, with the grudging precision of a professional acknowledging something she had initially doubted. "Thank you. Don't be smug about it." "I'm not. I'm relieved." There was a non-trivial possibility it wouldn't work. She extinguished the light and stood back. "What about the sensor array? You said the doubling affects analytical processing. The secondary loop also routes to the sensor cluster. During a boost cycle, the frame's battlefield awareness doubles. Range, resolution, targeting discrimination. The pilot interface will feel different. Overwhelming, potentially, if you're not used to the input density. You won't be piloting this." "No. Then who?" He picked up a tool and moved to the next assembly point. "I've been thinking about that." She watched him for a moment. "You want me to? You know the frame architecture better than anyone I have access to. You know Britannian tactical doctrine, which means you understand it well enough to work against it. And you are," he paused, choosing words, "someone whose frustration with her current situation has reached the point where a different situation is more attractive than a familiar one." Valletta was silent for a moment. Outside, distantly, the settlement made its ordinary nighttime sounds. She was used to this, Issei had noticed. She processed serious things quietly and completely and then spoke when the processing was finished rather than talking through it, which he found significantly more efficient than most people's habits. What happens to me if this goes wrong? She said. Specifically? Not in the general sense. What happens to Valletta Nu if she gets into a Black Knight operation in a modified Sutherland and it comes apart? If the operation fails publicly, Britannian intelligence will eventually identify the modified frame and trace the component acquisition. That trail is designed to terminate at a series of dead ends, but under sustained investigation, some of it leads back to settlement inventory. He set down the tool. If you're captured in the field during the operation, Zero's standing orders are to ensure no Black Knight member is taken alive, which is not a policy I can override. He met her gaze directly. If you die, I will have failed someone I asked to take a significant risk, and I will carry that. Valletta looked at him. That last part, she said? You didn't have to say that. I know. Most people asking someone to take a risk like this would have left it at the operational analysis. Most people asking someone to take a risk like this are using them. He picked up the tool again. I'm asking you to make a choice. The difference requires honesty about the full cost. She turned away from him and looked at the partially assembled frame for a long time. I'll pilot it, she said. He nodded and went back to work. Above them, the academy breathed in its ordinary rhythms. In the frame's dark cockpit housing, unoccupied, the distributor coupling waited with the patient stillness of something built to hold enormous force and to release it at the precise right moment. Chapter 9, The Weight of a Name. Ashford Academy Courtyard and Student Council Room. Shirley Fenette had noticed something. She was not certain what she had noticed, which was the part that bothered her most. She was generally a person who knew the precise nature of what she was thinking, who found ambiguity uncomfortable in the way of someone for whom clarity was a form of safety. But the thing she had noticed about Issei Hyoudou resisted clarity the way water resisted being held in a fist. She noticed it in small things. The way he came to student council meetings prepared in ways that implied he had spent real time thinking about the agenda before he arrived. The way he listened to people, not politely but actually, tracking the structure of what they were saying and the structure of what they were not saying simultaneously. The way he sat in the courtyard in the evenings sometimes, alone, looking at nothing in particular with an expression that was not absent but very, very far away. She noticed it, specifically, in the way he had noticed her. Not in the way she was used to being noticed, which was fine and ordinary and occasionally useful and not something she spent much energy on. He had noticed the way she organized information, the filing system for the council's records that she had built over 2 semesters, the cross-referencing method she used for event logistics. He had asked about it once, specifically and seriously, as though it were a subject worth understanding, and she had explained it, and he had listened with the same full attention he gave to everything, and at the end he had said that her indexing architecture was genuinely efficient, and that he had adopted a version of it for his own system. Nobody had ever called her indexing architecture efficient before. She was thinking about this on a Thursday morning while organizing the filing cabinet in the council room when the door opened, and Issei came in. He stopped when he saw her. Council meeting isn't until 3. I know. I'm filing. She held up a folder by way of evidence. You're here early. I needed the table. He moved to the far end and set down a stack of papers, to obey! And she caught the corner of one of them before he covered it with his arm.
We will shatter this old world order!
That did not look like anything related to festival planning. She said nothing about this. She had not said anything about several things over the past weeks, not because she was incurious but because she had the sense, specific and hard to articulate, that some of what was happening around Issei Hyoudou was the kind of thing that the knowing of it changed you, and she was not yet sure she wanted to be changed. Surely, he said, without looking up from his papers. Yes. If I asked you to do something and I couldn't tell you why, and the only thing I could tell you was that the why was important, would you? She set down the folder and looked at him. He was still looking at his papers, pen moving, but there was a quality to the stillness of his shoulders that told her this was not a casual question. That depends on what the thing was, she said. Fair. He wrote something. There's a community in Shinjuku Block 7. 11 families, mostly elderly and children under 12. Next week, there's going to be a Britannian military operation nearby. The operation itself won't hit their block, but the secondary security cordon will cut their access to food distribution for approximately 48 hours if nobody moves the supply before it goes up. She was quiet for a moment. What do you need? He looked up at last. She had long since registered, unusual eyes, dark and steady and holding a quality of attention that most people his age had not yet developed, and that she suspected most people in general never quite managed. 3 vehicles. A route through the settlement that I've mapped to avoid checkpoint overlap. And someone who can organize the actual distribution quickly enough that it's done before the cordon closes. He paused. The organizing part is the hard part. The route is already there. The vehicles I can arrange. But the organizing needs someone who can walk into a situation with strangers who are frightened and make them feel like things are going to work. You think I can do that? I know you can do that. I've watched you manage the council's external partners for 8 months. You're the reason 3 different vendor contracts didn't fall apart in the second semester. You're good at people, Shirley. The real kind of good, not the performed kind. She looked at him for a long moment. The quality of the room was the specific quality of a conversation that both people in it understood was significant. You've been doing things like this for a while, she said. Haven't you? A pause. For a while, yes. Does Millie know? She knows something. She's chosen not to know the specifics. I respect that. He set down the pen. I'm not asking you to be part of anything ongoing, Shirley. I'm asking you for one afternoon next Thursday. Afterward, you can decide whether you want to know more or less, and I'll respect either answer completely. She picked up her folder and looked at it without seeing it. The thing was this, she had already decided, somewhere before this conversation, in the accumulation of small observations over 8 months. She had not admitted it to herself because admitting things was the step after deciding, and deciding was final. What time Thursday? She said. The relief in his expression was small and quickly managed, but she caught it. She was good at people, after all. 2 in the afternoon. I'll have a vehicle at the south gate. She nodded and went back to filing. He went back to his numbers. Outside, a Britannian patrol craft hummed past the courtyard windows, its searchlight threading between the buildings in its neat, obedient arc, and neither of them looked up. Chapter 10. What the Dragon Remembers. Ashford Academy, night. Sleep had never been straightforward for Issei Hyoudou. There were the obvious reasons, the years of dragonfire dreams, the layer of operational awareness that did not fully switch off, the habit of treating the transition between consciousness and sleep as a liminal space worth observing rather than surrendering to. But there was also something beneath the obvious reasons, something older, that he had never fully mapped. Drake had told him, in one of their late-night conversations, that the boosted gear preserved something of each of its hosts. Not memory precisely. Not personality. Something closer to resonance, the emotional frequency of people who had held the sacred gear and lived with its weight, and eventually passed it forward. Issei had asked what that meant for him, specifically, and Drake had been quiet for a long time before answering. It means you carry impressions, the dragon had said. Not their lives. Not their choices. But the texture of what certain things felt like to them. Responsibility. Anger at injustice. The particular loneliness of being something that no one else has a word for. That sounds uncomfortable. It is. It is also useful, if you treat it as data rather than noise. Tonight the impressions were very loud. He lay on his back in the dark and let them move through him without resistance, the way Cece had taught him. Do not grip, do not direct. Let the resonance complete its circuit and return to rest. There was grief in the current tonight, old and worn, smooth and sourceless, the grief of someone who had loved something and watched it diminish. There was fury, very old, compressed to a hard point by long familiarity until it functioned less like emotion and more like infrastructure. There was, underneath everything, something he did not have a precise word for. The sensation of standing at the edge of a significant thing and understanding that stepping forward was irreversible.
I, Issei,
he stared at the ceiling.
Command you
in the
to
space
obey.
Behind his left eye, his wrist rested. He was still getting used to the weight of
this
it,
old world
the constant
order.
availability that was its most unsettling quality. Power that could not be set down, only used carefully or not used at all. He had used it once, in a controlled test 3 weeks ago, on a construction worker near the settlement perimeter who had been about to report a Black Knight supply cache to a Britannian checkpoint. The command had been, "Forget you came this way tonight." The man had turned around and walked back the way he had come. Issei had stood in the alley afterward for a long time, thinking about what the use of a power that removed someone's choice actually meant, even when the use was defensive and the alternative was worse. He had concluded that he did not like it. He had also concluded that not liking it was the appropriate response, and that anyone who did not feel the weight of that use after performing it was not someone who should be performing it. He rolled onto his side. The city lights came through the curtain gap, faint and orange, and outside, 2 floors down, he could hear the distant machinery of the settlement making its night sounds. "You're thinking about the worker," Drake said. "Yes. You made the right decision. I know. Knowing and feeling are different things. Also yes." He looked at the curtain. "The impressions tonight. The grief. That was yours, wasn't it?" A pause. The vast presence in his arms shifted, thoughtful. "Partially. I have been a dragon king for longer than most human civilizations have existed. I have watched things I value become things I did not recognize. The grief is a residue." Another pause. "The fury is mine. The thing without a word is yours. Standing at the edge? Yes. Narita is the edge." "Narita is the edge," Drake confirmed. "Everything before this has been preparation. Everything after it will be consequence. You understand this. I've understood it for a while. Then why are you awake?" Issei thought about this. "Because I'm thinking about the people who are coming with me," he said finally. "Valletta doesn't know exactly what the operation will feel like from inside a cockpit when the boost fires. She knows the theory. She doesn't know the reality." He paused. "Kiba will be in the field as Black Knight support. Shirley is handling civilian logistics in a cordon zone. None of them have done anything at this scale before. You're afraid of leading. I'm afraid of leading badly." The dragon was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that was not comfort exactly, but the weight of long perspective. "Every host I have ever carried who was worth carrying was afraid of leading badly before the first real test. Every host I have ever carried who was not afraid of it led badly." The warmth in his arm was steady, like an old lamp. "The fear is not a warning. It is a calibration. It tells you that you understand the cost, which is the exact prerequisite for managing the cost." Issei closed his eyes. "Go to sleep, partner," Drake said. "The plans are made. The frame is ready. Your people are as prepared as preparation can make them. The rest is execution." "I know." "Then trust the architecture." It took a while. But eventually the city sounds softened and the orange light through the curtain became simply orange light, and the thoughts became less sharp and the old grief in the resonance settled into something more like quiet. He slept. In the basement 2 floors below, in the dark, the modified Sutherland waited. Chapter 11, The Narita Briefing. Black Knight Forward Base, Shinjuku. Zero ran the briefing the way Issei had expected, with the theatrical efficiency of someone who understood that the presentation of a plan was itself a form of persuasion. The warehouse had been reconfigured since their first meeting. Satellite maps on 3 walls now, the Narita mountain range rendered in careful topographic detail, the Britannian military installation marked in red with annotated defensive positions. 17 Black Knight operatives were arranged in a loose semicircle, most of them in civilian clothes, all of them with the particular quality of attention that came from understanding that the information being presented had a direct relationship to whether they survived the next week. Issei stood at the back wall with Cece beside him and Valletta 3 feet to his right, wearing borrowed clothes, her height and posture and the quality of her stillness making her look not quite like anyone else in the room in ways that a perceptive person might eventually identify. He was counting on the fact that most people, when presented with a detailed tactical briefing, focused on the map and not the edges of the audience. Suzaku Kururigi stood near Zero's right shoulder. He had acknowledged Issei with a brief nod at the door, which Issei had returned. In the 2 weeks since their first meeting, He and Suzaku had exchanged exactly 4 short communications through the contact protocol, 2 operational updates, and 2 questions about frame modifications that Suzaku had clearly been trying to evaluate independently. He was careful, Suzaku. Careful in the way of someone who had learned that trust was expensive, and that the lesson had been taught with real cost. Issei respected that. Phase 10 said, the pointer touching the map at the lower mountain approach, is infiltration of the maintenance track through the North Valley. The Sutherland units enter here. Britannian patrol rotation puts the Western observation post at minimum staffing between 0200 and 0400. That is our window. The intelligence for that rotation came from our external source, Suzaku said to the room,
command
without
you
inflection,
to obey,
which has been accurate on 11 prior occasions. Phase 2
will
is
shatter
the
this
Eastern
old
Relay
world
Station.
order.
Cornelia's command structure routes through it. Disrupting it gives us approximately 20 minutes before they can re-establish coordinated response. In those 20 minutes, we reach the primary installation. Issei was tracking 3 separate problems simultaneously. The briefing was tactically sound on its own terms. Zero had clearly thought through the military dimensions with genuine sophistication. What the plan did not account for was the relay station's secondary function, which Issei had identified 3 days ago in the Selim Group documentation. It was also the routing point for the Devil Lineage financial communication he was trying to intercept. Simply destroying it, as Zero's current plan called for, would eliminate the evidence along with the station. He waited for the Phase 2 description to conclude and then spoke from the back wall. The relay station. Zero stopped. The room turned toward him with the collective attention of people recalibrating who was speaking and what authority that carried. The relay station has a secondary archive function, Issei said. There is a data core in the sublevel. If the station is destroyed before the core is extracted, we lose documentation of non-Britannian interests at Narita that took 3 months to locate. He paused. I need 8 minutes inside the station before it goes down. I need 1 unit providing cover for that entry and the following extraction. I can do it without affecting Phase 2's 20-minute window if the unit timing is adjusted. Zero was very still. You're asking to modify the operational plan the night before execution. I'm asking you to account for an objective that makes the long-term value of this operation significantly larger than its tactical win. He met the masked gaze calmly. The documentation in that data core is the first hard evidence of supernatural political interference in Area 11's governance that can be presented to a civilian audience. Without it, we can liberate this territory and have it recaptured by proxy within a decade. With it, we begin building the case for the kind of governance structure that actually holds. A silence. He could feel the room processing it. Most of the operatives in the room had a ground-level understanding of the resistance, tactical objectives, surviving the week. The longer game was not their primary operating framework. Zero, he was fairly certain, was thinking about the longer game. 8 minutes, Zero said. 7 if the boost cooperates. Another pause. Suzaku was watching him with an expression that was not quite skepticism and not quite belief. The specific expression of someone trying to determine which category was appropriate. The modified unit, Suzaku said. Where does it fit in the deployment? Eastern approach. The station entry. And wherever the engagement gets thick enough that a standard Sutherland isn't sufficient. He said this without drama. My job during this operation is to be the thing that fills the gaps the plan doesn't account for. The plan is good. Gaps are inevitable. I'll be in them. Zero looked at him for a long moment. Then he moved the pointer back to the map. Revise Phase 2, he said. Adjust the Eastern Approach Unit to cover station entry. 8-minute data extraction window. Relay station destruction at the 7-minute mark if extraction is incomplete. If extraction is complete, on signal. He moved on to Phase 3. Issei exhaled slowly and turned his attention back to the map. Beside him, so quietly that only he could hear it, Cece said, Nice? Thank you, he said. Don't be smug about it. He almost smiled. Chapter 12, Before the Storm. Ashford Academy, the night before. The night before Narita was very quiet. Cece was in the storage annex, doing what she always did in quiet hours, reading from the stack of documents she carried with her everywhere, organized in a system that Issei had eventually decoded as chronological by acquisition rather than subject, each document a record of something she had thought worth preserving from across what had to be centuries of observation. He sat across from her, and did not pretend to read. He was thinking through the operation sequence for the 40th time, not because he did not know it but because the 40th time was when the gaps that the first 13 had not revealed tended to surface. "You're running the sequence again," Cece said, without looking up. "Yes. Is this the version where you've found a new problem or the version where you're confirming there are none?" "Currently the confirming version. Could become the other at any moment. Efficient." She turned a page. "Eat something." "You haven't since this morning." "I'm not hungry." "That is a separate issue from whether you should eat. The boost draws on your biological baseline. Depleted baseline equals reduced boost ceiling." She set down her document, and slid a wrapped piece of pizza across the table with the focused care she always applied to that particular transaction. "Eat." He ate. They sat in companionable silence for a while. It was one of the things he had come to value most about Cece, who had somewhere in 4 centuries developed the understanding that silence shared between people who trusted each other was not emptiness but a form of presence. He had not known many people before her who understood that. "Tell me about him," he said eventually. She did not ask who. "He was extraordinary. Genuinely. Brilliant and driven and capable of inspiring people in ways that I have not seen before or since." Her voice was its usual measured quality, but the weight underneath was very low.
Issei,
he also
command
believed,
you to obey!
that the correct answer to what the world had done to him was to become something that matched its worst dimensions.
We will shatter this old world order!
He thought that was how you won. It isn't. No. You win by becoming something the worst dimensions have no category for. She picked up her document again. He ended up alone at the end. That was the part that troubled me most. Not the method of the ending. The aloneness. Issei thought about Valletta in the basement with a pencil and a power distribution schematic. About Kiba, folding the first intelligence sheet into his jacket without asking for reasons. About Shirley, asking what time Thursday with the practical composure of someone who had already made her decision. "I won't end up alone," he said. "I know." A pause. "That is why I chose you. Among other reasons." He finished the pizza. "Cece. Yes. When this is finished. Not tomorrow, not next year, eventually. When the structure is actually pulled down, and the better one is actually built. What do you want before the end?" She was quiet for a long time. The lamp between them made a small warm circle and outside the settlement made its sounds. "I want to see it working," she said finally. "The new thing. I want to see it standing on its own without needing to be held up. That's all." A pause. "That's not a small thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't. But you'll build it." He thought about the modified Sutherland in the space below. He thought about the data core at Narita and the 3 months of documentation leading to it, and the long, patient line of reasoning that had connected one intelligence fragment to the next until the shape of the thing they were actually fighting had become visible. "We'll build it," he said. She turned a page. Outside, the stars that were not stars moved in their patient circuits, and the mountain at Narita waited in the dark, and 12 hours from now everything would be different in ways that neither of them could fully predict and both of them had prepared for as carefully as the nature of significant things permitted. He went to bed at 2 in the morning. He did not sleep for a long time. But when he did, there were no drag-on-fire dreams. There was only the dark, and the warmth in his left arm, steady as a heartbeat, present as gravity. Chapter 13 Narita. Mount Narita, 0200 hours. The mountain was cold and very dark and smelled of pine resin and the particular mineral sharpness of high altitude. Issei moved through it in the borrowed black night ground uniform, darker than civilian clothes, less conspicuous than armor. He was not carrying conventional weapons. He was carrying 3 things: a data extraction module the size of a thick book that Cece had procured through means she described only as old contacts, a communications earpiece tuned to the operational frequency, and his left arm. The boosted gear was not visible tonight. It did not need to be. He could feel it awake and present, the deep warmth running through the bone, the sense of something vast coiled and ready. Drake had been quiet since the operation began, conserving language for when it mattered. The communication between them had shifted into something more immediate than words, a shared awareness of the operational space, the dragon's ancient senses extending Issei's own. The modified Sutherland moved parallel to him, 50 meters uphill, Valletta piloting with a precision he could track by the sound of its footfalls. Even in a Sutherland, her movement quality was identifiable. Efficient. Economical. The footprint of someone who had spent enough time in a framed cockpit that the machine had become a second body. In his earpiece, Zero's voice, Phase 1 complete. Western observation post neutralized. Eastern approach on your mark. He pressed the transmit. Moving. The relay station was a low concrete structure built into the mountain's eastern face, designed to look like a maintenance facility and functioning as a communications hub for Cornelia's regional command network. From 20 meters, the exterior was unremarkable. 2 guards, ground level, rotating in a pattern that he had memorized from the intelligence profile. A service entrance on the north face with a card access lock whose code he had acquired through a series of steps that he had taken 3 weeks ago on the assumption that they would be needed tonight. He had been correct. Sutherland hold, he said quietly. Cover the access road. If anything moves up it before I signal, light it. Valletta's voice in his ear, confirmed. He moved to the north face in the shadow of the tree line and reached the service entrance without the guards completing their rotation. The code worked. The door opened. He was inside in under 20 seconds. The station interior was functional and sparse. Banks of communications equipment in a main room, a staircase to the upper observation level, and the sub-level access he had identified in the documentation. A standard maintenance hatch behind the primary equipment bank, secured with a mechanical lock rather than electronic, which he opened with a tension wrench and a pick that he had practiced with for 4 evenings until the motion was automatic. Down. The sublevel was cold and smelled of old electronics, and the faint burnt copper note of processing hardware running in a climate-controlled space. The data core was exactly where the documentation said it would be, a rack-mount storage system in the northeast corner. Standard Britannian military architecture, the access port compatible with the extraction module he was carrying. He plugged in. A countdown began in the corner of his vision, 7 minutes to the relay station's destruction, per Zero's revised timeline.
Issei,
the extraction
command
module's
you
progress
to obey.
indicator began to move. Extraction initiated. He sub-vocalized
We will shatter
into the
this
earpiece.
old world order.
Zero's voice confirmed. Phase 2 advancing on eastern face. You have your window. He watched the progress indicator and the countdown simultaneously and thought about nothing except those 2 numbers and whether their relationship was going to hold. At 4 minutes and 20 seconds, it stopped holding. An alarm, not the facility's main alarm but something secondary, a monitoring system he had not identified in the documentation, began to pulse. Low and steady, not the cascade that preceded a lockdown. A single source alert. Something in the station had noticed an anomalous data access and was reporting it. He had 40 seconds before the reporting cycle completed and the station's main security system received the alert. Situation, Valletta said in his ear. She had heard the alarm's frequency through the external sensors. Secondary monitor. 38 seconds. He looked at the extraction progress. 62%. I need the external guards occupied. A pause of exactly 2 seconds. Done, Valletta said. Outside, through the station's reinforced walls, he heard the distinctive mechanical impact of a Knightmare frame's foot striking gravel at speed, followed by the shout of one of the guards, and then the sound of both of them moving toward the south face where the Sutherland had made itself visible. He had 30 seconds and 8% of the extraction remaining. In his arm, Drake pulsed. Partner. Not yet, he said. The extraction module is processing at its mechanical ceiling. The boost would accelerate the transfer rate. The boost in an enclosed space with active electronics will fry everything in the room. I know. I was checking whether you knew. I know. He watched the indicator. 89%. 91. The secondary alarm pulsed. 95. He pulled the module at 98%. Close enough. He was back up the stairs and through the north face entrance in 40 seconds. Behind him, he could hear the guards rounding the south corner back to their posts. He moved into the tree line without running, because running drew attention that walking controlled. Extraction complete, he said into the earpiece. Station is yours. Zero's voice, even through the vocoder, carried something that might have been satisfaction. Understood. Phase 2 concluding. Pull back to rendezvous. 23 seconds later, the relay station ceased to exist. The sound rolled across the mountain like something very heavy falling very fast, and the eastern face lit orange for 3 seconds, and then the dark came back. Valletta Sutherland was beside him at the tree line, cockpit cycling open. She dropped from the entry hatch and hit the ground in a controlled descent, moved toward him without breaking stride. 90%, he said. I heard. She looked at the orange glow where the station had been. Was it worth it? He turned the extraction module over in his hands. It was warm from the transfer and dense with its own specific gravity. Yes, he said. She nodded once, the nod of a professional accepting a cost-benefit conclusion, and they moved together down the mountain toward the extraction point, the mountain dark and cold around them, the pine resin sharp on the night air, the operation still running in his earpiece, clean and efficient, and moving toward its conclusion. He had the data. The data was the beginning of the architecture. The architecture was the beginning of everything else. Chapter 14. What the data reveals. Black Knight Safe House, post Narita. The extraction module held 11,000 files. Issei did not sleep. He had a portable processing unit, acquired through Valletta's channels, that could read the storage architecture, and he worked through the files in the methodical way he approached everything, establishing a structural map before diving into any individual document, building a framework of what was there before examining what any piece of it meant. Cece sat beside him with her own copy of the index that he printed as he built it, reading in parallel, occasionally circling a file name with a pen. By 3 in the morning, the shape of what they had was clear enough to summarize. 3 entities, he said, spreading the index across the table. The Selim Group, which we already knew. 2 others, a registered investment vehicle called the Astaroth Development Fund, which is structurally similar to Selim, and a consulting entity called the Phoenix Advisory Group. He tapped each name as he said it. All 3 registered in Euroland territories. All 3 with investment positions in Area 11 financial infrastructure. All 3 with communication traffic routing through the Narita relay station. Astaroth and Phoenix, Cece said, without inflection. House names. Family lines. Devil aristocracy, both. Mid-tier in the current Great Satan hierarchy, significant in terms of territorial ambition. She looked at the index with the expression she wore when old information was acquiring new context. The Astaroth line has been historically connected to educational and financial infrastructure acquisition. Phoenix has interests in healing and restoration services, which translates in practice to significant leverage over communities that depend on those services. So they're not just holding financial positions here. They're building service dependencies. A population that depends on your educational infrastructure and your medical proxies is a population you can redirect with surprising precision. She put down her pen. This is old doctrine. They have been doing this for centuries.
Command you
usually
to obey.
In slower-moving political environments where the timeline for building dependency
we will shatter this old world order.
A pause. The Area 11 campaign accelerated the displacement and destabilization enough that they could compress the timeline. Britannian conquest created a refugee population and destroyed existing support structures. Into that vacuum, they moved, quickly. For them. He leaned back and looked at the ceiling. 3 separate devil families with interlocking positions in Area 11's infrastructure. Not coordinated necessarily. Each pursuing its own interests. But structurally aligned by the nature of those interests, the way 3 separate rivers could create a flood without any of them deciding to. Zero needs to know this, he said. Zero needs to know enough of this to make informed decisions. He doesn't need to know all of it in the first briefing. Cece looked at him. You've been careful about the pace of disclosure with him. Don't accelerate it because you're excited about what you found. He registered the caution. She was right. The financial documentation first, he said. The entity structures. The property positions. That's the part that can be verified against public records and doesn't require him to accept claims about the nature of what he's dealing with. He sorted a stack of files to one side. The family identification comes in a second briefing, after he's had time to verify the financial layer independently. And the operational implications? Third briefing. When we're talking about what to actually do about it. CC nodded. You're pacing it so he builds his own conclusions rather than accepting yours. His own conclusions are ones he'll defend. Mine are ones he might eventually doubt. Yes. She picked up her pen again. That's the right way to build an alliance with someone as independent as Zero. You're feeding him pieces he can assemble himself, and then arriving when he's assembled them to confirm and extend. She circled the file name. He will eventually realize that's what you're doing. I know. By the time he does, the alliance will be established enough that it won't matter. What will matter is the pattern of accuracy, not the method of presentation. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh but carried the spirit of one. You would have been a fascinating problem in any century, she said. I'll take that. You should. I don't say things like that often. She returned to the index. Get some sleep. The data will still be here in 4 hours and you'll read it better rested. He looked at the stack of files. 2 more hours, he said. 1. 1.5. She did not answer. She circled another file name. He went back to reading. Chapter 15, The Morning After. Ashford Academy, post-Narita dawn. The news about Narita reached the settlement by morning. It moved through the standard channels first. The official Britannian broadcasts describing an armed terrorist attack on a military installation, property destruction, personnel casualties presented in general terms that implied significance without specificity. Then it moved through the unofficial channels, the word-of-mouth networks in the 11 districts, the digital forums the settlement maintained in the borderline spaces of Britannian content oversight, the encrypted message systems that the Black Knights used and that Britannian intelligence was perpetually 2 steps behind. Zero's statement went out through the unofficial channels at 6 in the morning. The Narita operation had been successful, evidence of external interference in Area 11's governance had been secured, and the Black Knights would be releasing a documented analysis within 48 hours. Issei read the statement on his phone at 6:43, sitting on the edge of his bed with the particular stillness of someone whose body had not yet fully committed to being awake. Outside his window, the settlement was beginning its morning, oblivious. The 48-hour timeline was tighter than he had recommended. Zero was moving fast. He could not decide whether that was good or not yet. He showered, dressed, and was at breakfast before anyone else in the dormitory wing. He ate without appetite and thought about the data core sitting in a locked case beneath his bed. Shirley arrived at the dining hall at 7:15 with the slightly unfocused quality of someone who had also not slept enough, carrying a tablet and looking at it with the expression she wore when something was demanding more of her processing capacity than she was comfortable allocating to it. She sat across from him without a formal greeting. Block 7, she said. Yes. The supply distribution. Thursday. She set the tablet on the table. It worked. I talked to 3 of the families this morning. He looked up. The cordon went up at midnight, she said. If the supply hadn't gone in before it, there would have been shortages for at least 48 hours in the northern cluster. 3 elderly residents and 2 families with infants. Did anything go wrong? One checkpoint almost stopped the second vehicle. But I had the Ashford Cultural Committee documentation you gave me and the checkpoint officer decided we were a school supply run and waved us through. She looked at her coffee. I was not particularly frightened, which surprised me. I thought I would be. You're good in operational situations. You stay on the immediate task. Is that what that is? It's a significant thing. Most people struggle with it. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the courtyard was filling with the first students of the morning, carrying bags, moving in the comfortable patterns of an institution that had not changed in visible ways since yesterday. The world it was inside had. Issei, she said.
Issei,
yes.
Command
the Narita
you to
thing
obey.
On the news this morning. He was careful not to change anything about his expression.
We will shatter this old world order.
I saw it, he said. Zero's statement mentioned evidence of external interference in governance. She looked at him steadily. That's the thing you talked about in the council room. The investment entities. The things operating underneath the official political structure. He held her gaze. He did not confirm or deny. He allowed the silence to carry the weight that it carried. After a long moment, she nodded once, small and definitive. Okay, she said. I understand what's happening. She picked up her coffee. I don't need you to tell me more than that right now. But I want you to know that if there's more Thursday things to do, I want to know. Thursday things. Practical things. Things where someone is genuinely helped by the doing of them. She held his gaze with the particular steadiness that had been under the surface of every interaction they had ever had. I'm good at organizing. I'm good at people. I don't need to understand the entire architecture. I just need to know what to do and that it matters. He looked at her for a moment. You've been thinking about this for a while, he said. Since the council room. You asked a question and I took 3 days to answer it inside my own head before I answered it out loud. She looked at her coffee again. I think that's just how I work. It's a good way to work, he said. The morning light came through the dining hall windows in long clean lines and the courtyard was full now and the settlement was going about its ordinary morning and underneath all of it the shape of something was becoming clearer, piece by piece, the way the image in a developing photograph emerges from blankness, first the outlines, then the detail, then finally the full thing that had always been there waiting to be revealed. There will be more Thursday things, he said. She nodded. Good, she said, and picked up her tablet, and the ordinary morning resumed around them. Chapter 16. What Zero Wants to Know. Black Knight Coordination Meeting, undisclosed location. Zero asked for the briefing in 48 hours. Issei arrived with a bound document, 41 pages, organized in 3 sections. Financial documentation first. Entity structure second. The beginning of the operational implications third, presented as questions rather than conclusions. Suzaku was there. So was a woman he had not met before, introduced only as Ogi, who was clearly a senior organizational figure and who watched him with the patient evaluation of someone who had been around the Black Knights long enough to have a developed sense of who was worth listening to and who was not. He presented the financial layer in 15 minutes, clean and precise, no embellishment. The entity structures, the property positions, the Narita communication traffic. He set the documentation on the table and let it sit. Zero read it. Suzaku read it. Ogi read it. Nobody spoke for 4 minutes. 3 entities, Zero said. All registered in Euroland, all with Area 11 positions. That can be verified against settlement financial registry records, Issei said. Pages 12 through 18 are the cross-references. The property transaction history is independently confirmable. You're telling us to verify it ourselves. I'm telling you that I would, if I were you. He met the masked gaze without apology. Independent verification of the financial layer takes 3 days of research that any competent analyst can do. I'd recommend doing it before we discuss what the financial layer implies. A pause. You want us to build our own conclusions, Suzaku said. He said it without accusation, the observation of someone who had identified a method and was naming it. I want the conclusions to be yours because you'll be more confident in them and more committed to acting on them. He looked at Suzaku directly. Yes. That's exactly what I want. If that's a problem, I'll tell you the implications now. But I think you'll understand them better in 3 days than you do tonight. Suzaku and Zero exchanged a look. Whatever moved between them in that exchange was too fast and too familiar to read, the shorthand of 2 people who had been working together long enough to share a language. 3 days, Zero said. I'll be available when you're ready. He moved to go. Zero's voice stopped him. The Narita operation. A pause. The modified unit performed. The pilot performed, Issei said. The unit functioned as designed. Is the pilot available for future operations? He thought about Valletta, standing in the tree line after the explosion with the evaluation of a professional accepting a cost-benefit conclusion. She had not asked him what came next. She had simply been present, which was its own kind of answer. I'll ask her, he said. He walked out into the night. Cece was waiting at the corner of the block, coat collar up, watching the sky. How did it go? She said. As planned. They'll verify the financial layer independently. In 3 days we have the second briefing. And then? He thought about the extraction module and its 11,000 files. The Astaroth Development Fund and the Phoenix Advisory Group and the Selim Group, their interlocking positions, their service dependencies, the slow patient architecture of influence they had been building in the vacuum left by conquest. Then we show them the rest, he said. And we start building the counter-architecture. She fell into step beside him. The city moved around them in its nighttime patterns, oblivious and ordinary, and above it the stars that had not been renumbered watched the beginning of something that most of the people inside it did not yet have a name for. Issei Hyoudou had a name for it. He had been building
shatter
it,
this
piece
old
by
world
piece,
order.
Since the night on the railway track, since the first intelligence sheet passed Akiba, since the first dream of crimson fire in a childhood that had felt, in its formative years, like preparation for exactly this. He called it the right kind of fire. The kind that, if you were careful and precise and patient, did not burn what it was meant to illuminate. He walked on through the city of the settlement, the dragon worm in his arm, the data in the case under his arm, the shape of the next step already clear in the architecture of his thinking, and behind him the night folded back over the street like a curtain, and the next day was already beginning somewhere at the edge of the sky. Act 3. The counter-architecture. Power without structure is a fire in an open field. Structure without power is a house with no heat. The art is learning how much of each the moment requires. Chapter 17, 3 days. Settlement Financial Registry, Area 11, Day 1 of Verification. Suzaku Kuroji was a thorough researcher. Issei had suspected this from the first meeting, but the 3 days of independent verification confirmed it beyond any residual doubt. He knew Suzaku was working through the financial documentation because the questions arrived through the contact protocol in precise, sequential order, each one targeting the next logical gap in the entity structure analysis, each one revealing a research process that moved in straight lines without jumping ahead or circling back unnecessarily. Day 1. 3 questions about the Euroland registration framework for investment vehicles, specifically the requirements that would make a shell structure legally distinct from a fraud. Day 2. 2 questions about the settlement financial registry cross-referencing system and whether property transaction records were accessible through official civilian channels or required institutional access. Day 3. 1 question. It read, the Selim Group property position predates the Area 11 campaign by 26 months. The registration entity uses a Euroland address belonging to a management company with no other listed clients. Is there more like this in the data core? Issei wrote back, yes. 2 others with structural similarities. Briefing when ready. The reply came in 4 minutes, tonight. He arrived at the Shinjuku safe house at 10 with CC and the second document section. The room held 0, Suzaku, Ogi, and a 4th figure he had not seen before, a woman with long dark hair and the kind of stillness that came from being accustomed to operational environments, introduced as Colin. She watched him the way Suzaku watched things, with the systematic evaluation of a pilot assessing variables. He had the sense she had been told about him in terms that were partially skeptical, which was a reasonable position he would have held himself. The verification is complete, Zero said, without preamble. The financial layer is accurate. The entity structures are real and independently confirmable. A pause. Now tell us what they are. Issei placed the second document section on the table. The 3 entities are investment vehicles operated by hereditary aristocratic families with origins outside the Britannian political framework, he said. The Selim Group is connected to the Glaciolabalas line. The Astaroth Development Fund is connected to the Astaroth line. The Phoenix Advisory Group is connected to the Phoenix line. He spoke the names carefully, watching the room. These are not human families. They are not Britannia nobility, Euroland investors, or any category that exists within the frameworks your command structure currently operates with. The room was very quiet. Explain that, Ogi said. Cece spoke from her position near the wall, her voice carrying the weight of someone for whom this was ancient history rather than revelation. The supernatural aristocracy has existed in parallel to human political structures for as long as human political structures have existed. They do not rule human societies directly. They cultivate positions of influence within existing human power systems and redirect those systems toward outcomes that serve their territorial and political interests. She looked at Ogi. The Devil families have been doing this in what was Japan for 11 years. The Britannian invasion was, from their perspective, a management opportunity. It destabilized existing dependency relationships and created a new population with urgent needs that could be addressed through proxy services. Devils, Colin said. The word was flat, not dismissive, the flat of someone reserving judgment until they had more information. Yes, Cece said. You're asking us to believe that. I'm asking you to look at the financial documentation you've spent 3 days verifying and ask yourself what kind of entity has the resources, the time horizon, and the structural patience to build investment positions 2 years before a major colonial campaign. Cece's voice was entirely even. Human investment vehicles don't operate on 2-year pre-conflict positioning timelines. The risk assessment for that kind of prepositioning requires certainty about political outcomes that no human intelligence network in Area 11's theater possessed. Someone knew Britannia was going to invade. Someone was already moving when the generals were still planning. Silence. Zero had not moved during any of this. He sat at the head of the table with the particular stillness Issei had come to associate with his most intense thinking, the stillness of a mind moving very fast inside an enclosed space. You have evidence of this foreknowledge, Zero said. Pages 31 to 37, Issei said.
Command you to obey!
Communication traffic dates from the Narita data port. The earliest entry is dated 20 months before the Area 11 campaign began. The routing address traces to a consulting entity with no registered human personnel. Zero picked up the document and turned to page 31. 4 minutes of silence. They knew, Zero said. They knew, Issei confirmed. Another long silence. Colin was looking at the document now too, over Zero's shoulder. Suzaku had his eyes on Issei with the expression of someone who had been doing the verification precisely in order to reach this moment, and was now finding it significantly more significant than anticipated. The operational implication, Ogi said carefully. If these entities have been building dependencies in the civilian population through educational and medical proxies, what does that mean for the resistance? It means that when Britannia is gone, the vacuum they are positioned to fill is not political. It is structural. Services that people have come to depend on. Issei paused. You can defeat a colonial administration. You cannot defeat a water system. You cannot defeat a hospital. If those systems are controlled by interests that do not align with genuine self-governance, the political liberation means significantly less than it should. So we have to dismantle those positions before we remove Britannia. We have to document them, expose them, build alternatives, and ensure that any governance structure we establish has explicit legal frameworks that prevent supernatural aristocratic entities from holding controlling positions in civilian service infrastructure. He looked around the room. That is the long game. The operation at Narita was the first move of it. What we do with what we found there is the second. Zero looked at him for a long moment. How long have you been planning this? Since I understood what the problem actually was, Issei said. A while. You're 17, Colin said. She said it without the dismissiveness it might have carried earlier, and there was something in her voice that he classified as a preliminary form of respect, the kind that had not yet decided to commit but was leaning. Yes, he said. She looked at him steadily. What do you need from us? Time. Information sharing. And eventually, when the counter-architecture is built enough to show people, the Black Knight's platform to show it on. He met her gaze. The fight against Britannia is yours. The fight against what comes after Britannia is mine. I'm asking those two fights to be aware of each other. Zero set down the document. Agreed, he said. Chapter 18, Colin. Settlement Streets and Black Knight's safe house, following day. She found him the next afternoon. He had not expected that. He had expected the next contact to come through Suzaku, through the established protocol. Instead he heard footsteps on the fire escape outside the storage annex, and then a knock that was not the knock anyone he had briefed was using. And when he opened the rear access door, Colin Statfeld was standing in the alley in civilian clothes with her red hair tied back and her expression configured in the specific way of someone who has come to ask something they are not entirely sure they want the answer to. He stepped back. She came inside. She looked at the space, the maps, the analysis sheets, the folding table with its evidence stacks. She looked at it the way Valletta had looked at it in their first meeting, with the recalibration of someone whose model of the situation had been revised more significantly than anticipated. How long have you had all this? She said. The current iteration, about 4 months. The underlying framework, longer. You're not just an intelligence source. You have an independent objective. Yes. Zero knows this. Zero and I have an aligned interest arrangement. The political liberation of Area 11 from Britannian colonial control serves the long-term goal of establishing a governance structure free from supernatural interference. Those two things require each other. The resistance removes Britannia. The counter-architecture prevents the vacuum from being filled by something worse. She was quiet for a moment, arms folded, processing in the way he had begun to identify as characteristic. She was a tactile thinker. She needed to be moving or handling something, and when she was still she was doing something effortful. The boost, she said. At the briefing you mentioned it. Suzaku said the modified Sutherland output doubled during the operation. The pilot's output. The frame's output was a function of the pilot's. Valletta knew. He said nothing. I know who she is, Colin said, without accusation. I recognized the Sutherland at Narita. A Britannian-trained pilot, former Cornelia's guard, fighting on our side. A pause. You recruited a Britannian knight. I had a conversation with someone who was dissatisfied with the parameters of her institutional loyalty, and offered her better ones. That's a careful way to say recruited. I tried to use words precisely. He looked at her. You're here because you want to understand the boost. Not the political framework. The operational capability. Colin's expression shifted very slightly, the micro-adjustment of someone whose thinking has been accurately identified. I'm the Black Knight's best pilot, she said. It was not boasting. It was the flat assessment of a professional stating a relevant operational fact. If there's a capability that affects Nightmare performance in combat, I need to understand it. Fair. He moved to the table and cleared a space. Sit down, she sat, and he began explaining the boost architecture in the same careful sequential way he had explained it to Valletta.
We will shatter this old world order!
The rate event modification, the actuator headroom, the sensor amplification. He explained it without simplification because she was clearly capable of following the full technical picture, and he watched her absorb it with the focused attention of a highly trained pilot who was running the operational implications of each element as he described it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The sensor doubling, she said. During a boost cycle, the pilot's tactical picture doubles in resolution and range. Yes. For 11 seconds. Approximately. In 11 seconds at doubled sensor resolution, a skilled pilot can acquire and engage how many targets? He looked at her. What's your current rate on the simulator at standard resolution? 7 confirmed in 8 seconds under optimal conditions. At doubled resolution with the enhanced targeting discrimination, the theoretical ceiling is somewhere between 12 and 15, depending on target density and spacing. He paused. That assumes the pilot can process the doubled input without being overwhelmed. Most pilots would need training time to function at that density. How much training time? For someone at your level, probably less than for most. He said it straightforwardly, not as flattery. You think spatially at a level that most pilots don't reach. The doubled input would be dense, but it would be structured density. She looked at him with an expression that had moved from guarded through assessing and arrived somewhere in the vicinity of interested. You've been evaluating pilot profiles, she said. I evaluate everything. It's a habit. Useful habit. Sometimes. Occasionally people find it unsettling. I don't find it unsettling. She stood and moved back to the wall maps. The counter-architecture you talked about. You said the Black Knight's platform. You need us to be credible enough that when you show people the evidence of supernatural interference, they believe us. The evidence stands on its own. But evidence without a credible delivery mechanism is easy to dismiss. The Black Knights have an audience that trusts them. That trust took years to build. He paused. Yes. I need your platform. She looked at the maps for a moment. I want to be in the modified frame, she said. For the next operation. That's Valletta's decision as much as mine. I know. She turned from the wall. You can be honest with her about who I am. I'd rather she know than not. I was going to be. I know that too. She moved to the door. Suzaku is going to be difficult about the devil families. He believes in institutions. He's going to want a legal framework before he accepts that something outside Britannian law is a legitimate operational target. How are you planning to handle it? Give him the legal framework. The international governance agreements that technically apply to supernatural entities operating in human territorial space are old, but they exist. I've been building that case in parallel. He looked at her. I was going to present it in the 4th briefing. Colin looked at him for a long moment. You've already written the 4th briefing, she said. And the 5th. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a breath and was not quite either. See you at the next operation, she said, and went out the door. He stood in the storage annex for a moment after she left, looking at the wall maps, and thought about what it meant that the Black Knight's best pilot had come to find him on her own initiative the day after the briefing. It meant she was serious about the capability. It meant she was building her own assessment independent of Zero's. And it meant that when the moment came requiring a pilot who could function in double-resolution tactical space against something that no standard Britannian frame could handle, there would be 2 candidates instead of 1. He went back to the 5th briefing document. Chapter 19, Valletta and Colin. Ashford Academy Underground Workshop. He introduced them on a Wednesday evening in the workshop. It was not a comfortable introduction. He had not expected it to be. Valletta knew exactly who Colin was from her time in Cornelia's unit, not personally but professionally, the way any Britannian military pilot with access to Black Knight threat assessments knew the name Colin Statfeld, as the anomalous ace who had no business performing at the level she performed at in salvaged equipment, and who had been flagged as a priority engagement target in 3 separate operational briefings. Colin, for her part, had spent enough time in the Resistance to understand that Valletta knew represented a specific category of risk, the turned asset who might or might not have fully turned, who carried institutional knowledge of Britannian tactics that could be invaluable, or could be a back channel she had not entirely closed. They stood on opposite sides of the half-assembled second frame and looked at each other with the professional wariness of 2 pilots evaluating whether the other was going to be a problem. Issei stood between them and said nothing, because he had learned that the first 30 seconds of meetings like this were better processed without his intervention. Colin looked at the frame first. You built a second one. We're building a second one, Valletta said. The first had calibration data from the Narita operation. We're incorporating it into the second unit's power management architecture. Colin said. Yes. A pause. How long have you been doing frame engineering? Colin asked. Formally, 8 years. I cross-trained during my posting at the Britannian Military Academy. Valletta's voice was level. You, informally, since I was 14.
Issei, command
I've been
you
working
to
on
obey.
whatever the Black Knights could salvage. Colin looked at the distributor.
We will shatter this old world order.
That's not standard. No. That's a Gloucester-rated actuator in a Sutherland chassis. It gives the frame the load headroom to absorb the boost cycle without frame failure. Colin crouched and looked at the assembly from below. The coupling housing is custom. We machined it. The tolerances on the standard housing wouldn't hold at the peak load. You machined it here? The lathe is in the back room, Issei said. Colin looked at him. He could see her updating several things simultaneously. Who else knows about this space? She said. 4 people including the 3 of us. CC. And the scholarship student from Ashford running humanitarian supply routes in the settlement, Colin said. Shirley Fenette. I've seen her name in Black Knight civilian network reports. You read the civilian network reports, Issei said. I read everything I can get access to. It's a habit. She stood and looked at Valletta. I want to understand the second frame's deployment configuration. If I'm going to operate it in an engagement, I need to understand its specific performance envelope, not just the general boost mechanics. Valletta looked at Issei. He gave her the small nod that said this was her decision as the primary frame engineer. Valletta looked back at Colin. Sit down. I'll walk you through it. They spent the next 2 hours in the workshop with the frame between them and the calibration data from Narita spread on the workbench, and Issei sat at the far end and worked on the 4th briefing document while they talked. He tracked the conversation with half his attention, the specific half that was always monitoring the room even when he was doing something else. What he tracked was this. Valletta explained the frame architecture with the systematic precision of a trained engineer, and Colin asked questions that were precise and structurally acute, and revealed an intuitive understanding of frame dynamics that had not been formally educated but had been forged in the specific school of operational necessity. By the end of the first hour they were not being careful with each other. By the end of the second hour they were arguing about the optimal sensor integration protocol for the double resolution cycle, specifically whether the pilot interface should present the doubled data in a unified field or split channel, and the argument was the kind that people have when they are both serious about a problem and beginning to understand that the other person is equally serious. He looked up from the fourth briefing when they paused. Split channel, he said. They both looked at him. The doubled input in a unified field will cause processing overload in any pilot during the first several boost cycles. The split channel lets the pilot choose which half of the data to wait at any given moment until they're trained to the full field. He went back to the document. Start with split. Build to unified overtraining cycles. A silence. He's right, Valletta said. I know, Colin said. She did not sound pleased about it. Split channel. Outside, the settlement moved in its evening patterns, and in the workshop the second frame waited with the patience of a machine that did not yet know what it would eventually be asked to do. Chapter 20. The Geass and the Mirror. Ashford Academy rooftop, evening. Millie Ashford found him on the rooftop. He had not heard her coming, which was unusual enough to register. She moved quietly when she chose to, which was not often, because her usual mode was a kind of deliberate presence that announced itself and filled space. Quiet Millie was a different instrument than loud Millie, and he had only encountered it a few times. She sat beside him on the railing without preamble, looking out over the settlement lights. The evening was clear and the sky to the west was the specific orange-purple of a late settlement dusk, layered and dense. Shirley told me about Thursday, she said. She didn't have to do that. I know. She did anyway because she's Shirley, and she processes things by telling someone she trusts. A pause. She didn't tell me what it meant, specifically. She told me she helped some families and that it mattered and that she was going to keep doing things like it. He said nothing. I've been waiting, Millie said, for you to tell me how much I know. How much do you know? Enough to be aware that the most interesting student I have ever had the pleasure of being technically in charge of is doing things of significant consequence in spaces I cannot see. She looked at the horizon. Not enough to know the specific nature of those things. A pause. I've chosen not to know the specifics because knowing specifics creates responsibilities that my current position cannot accommodate. That's a sophisticated analysis. I'm a sophisticated person. I work very hard to make sure not everyone knows that. He almost smiled. I know you know. She turned from the horizon and looked at him with the particular attention she usually concealed behind social performance. I'm not going to ask you what you're doing. I'm not going to pretend I can make you stop doing it, or that I would want to. What I am going to say is this. She paused, and in the pause there was something more serious than anything she had said before. You are 17 years old, she said. You are the most capable 17-year-old I have ever encountered, and I suspect significantly more capable than most adults you will ever work alongside. That is real and it is not in question. Her voice was steady and careful. What is also real is that you are building something that involves people who trust you. Shirley trusts you. Kiba trusts you. Whatever you are doing involves people who will follow your thinking into places they would not go otherwise.
Command you
She
to
paused.
obey!
I don't know your full intentions. I believe
we
they
will
are good.
shatter this old
I
world
am
order!
asking you not to be so focused on the architecture that you forget that the people in it are not pieces. He was quiet for a long moment. The settlement lights spread below them in their grid, and somewhere in the grid, Kiba was routing another intelligence sheet, and Shirley was thinking about the next Thursday thing, and Valletta and Colin were arguing about sensor protocols in a basement. I think about that constantly, he said. The people in it. Good. Keep thinking about it. She stood and straightened her blazer with the returning efficiency of someone resuming a persona. Also, you're 3 days late on the cultural festival venue checklist. I'll have it to you tomorrow. You'll have it to me tonight, or Shirley will handle it, and feel guilty about it. And I won't have Shirley feel guilty when she has better things to spend her energy on. He looked at her. You're remarkably good at that, he said. At what? caring about people in the most operationally effective possible direction. She looked at him for a moment, and in her expression there was something warm and something that was also, underneath the warmth, the faintest trace of the weight that serious people carry. Go finish the checklist, she said. He went. On the way back to the dormitory, passing through the courtyard where the evening light was fading and the settlement sounds rose up around the academy walls, he felt the weight in his left arm pulse once, quiet and sure. She understands more than she lets on, Drake said. Yes, Issei said quietly. She is choosing to support you without becoming a participant. That is a significant thing to choose. I know. Don't waste it. I don't intend to. He went inside and finished the checklist in 40 minutes, and sent it to Millie's message system and then went back to the fourth briefing, and the night settled over the academy, and in the basement below the second frame's modified power system sat in the dark and waited for the shape of whatever came next. Chapter 21, The Fourth Briefing. Black Knight Coordination Center. The fourth briefing was the longest. He had structured it differently from the previous three. The first had been financial documentation. The second had been family identification. The third had been the operational implications of supernatural infrastructure control. The fourth was what he called, in his own notes, the legal substrate, the argument for why the counter-architecture was not just strategically necessary but legitimately grounded in the existing frameworks of international and supernatural governance. Zero had asked for this specifically. Not in those terms. But the questions he had asked through Suzaku in the days between briefings had consistently circled back to the same fundamental concern. On what authority does anyone act against entities that do not fall within the established jurisdiction of any human legal system? It was the right question. Issei had been waiting for it. The full attendance had expanded. Zero, Suzaku, Ogi, Colin. 2 additional senior Black Knight figures, Diethard, who had the sharp acquisitive attention of someone who processed the world primarily as information and was currently processing Issei with visible interest, and Toto, who sat with his arms folded and looked at Issei with the professional skepticism of a career soldier evaluating a civilian tactician. He presented the document section by section. The supernatural governance accords of the 15th century, negotiated between the major devil houses and the leading human power structures of the period, established territorial and operational parameters for supernatural entities conducting economic activity in human jurisdictions. Most of those human power structures no longer existed in anything like their original form. The Accords remained technically active because no subsequent human governance framework had the knowledge or the framework to supersede them. In other words, Zero said, when Issei reached the relevant section, the devil families are operating in violation of agreements they themselves are party to. The Phoenix and Astaroth positions in Area 11 specifically violate the Accord provisions against service dependency cultivation without explicit governance consent, Issei confirmed. The Selim Group pre-conflict positioning violates the Accord provisions against interference in human territorial conflict outcomes. All 3 are documentable. He set the relevant pages on the table. This is the legal substrate. It is not the same as international law as currently understood by any human government. But it is the framework under which the supernatural aristocracy itself claims to operate, and demonstrating their own violation of their own frameworks is the most effective lever for a public argument. Toto spoke for the first time. Public argument to whom? Human publics don't know these frameworks exist. Not yet. Issei looked at him. The exposure strategy has 2 phases. The first is internal, building the evidence base and the legal argument so that any governance structure we establish has the framework to enforce its own boundaries. The second is external, the public release, timed for maximum political impact at the moment when a liberated Japan is in the process of establishing its governance institutions. He paused. The external release requires a delivery platform with credibility. That is why I need the Black Knights. Toto looked at Zero. Something moved between them in the shorthand of a long professional relationship. The military operations, Toto said, turning back to Issei. The counter-architecture. It will require engagements against supernatural entities directly. What does that look like operationally? That depends on which entities and at what
Issei,
point in the exposure
command
process.
You to obey!
He was careful here. The devil families are not going to respond
We will
to
shatter this
exposure
old
peacefully.
world order!
When the documentation goes public, there will be direct responses. Some of those responses will be operationally conventional: proxy forces, economic pressure, information operations. Some will not be. He met Toto's gaze. The non-conventional responses are what the modified frames are designed for. A standard nightmare cannot engage at the level required. A boost-modified command unit can. 1 or 2 modified frames against the combined resources of 3 hereditary devil families, Toto said flatly. Not simultaneously. Sequentially, targeted at specific pressure points, designed to demonstrate capability rather than achieve comprehensive victory. Issei paused. The objective is not to defeat the devil families in combat. The objective is to demonstrate that they are not invulnerable, that their operational methods can be countered, and that the political cost of continued interference in a liberated Japan exceeds the value of their current positions. He looked at the room. Devil aristocracy responds to the same pressure calculations as any other aristocracy. When the cost of holding a position exceeds the value of the position, they reassess. We need to change the calculation. Not win a war. A long silence. Diethard, who had not spoken before, said, "You think like a strategist." Yes, Issei said. At 17. The age is irrelevant. The thinking is what matters. Diethard smiled with the particular appreciation of someone who had found something worth paying attention to. Zero tapped the document on the table. The Accords? You said they're technically active. Who enforces them? Currently, no one. The enforcement mechanism in the original Accord framework required cooperation between the parties. The human parties to the original Accords have no successors capable of invoking them. Issei paused. But the supernatural parties are still bound by them. And the great Satans, the highest level of the devil hierarchy, are the original signatories. If a claim is made against the 3 families under the Accord framework, it has to be answered at the great Satan level. Which means we can force a conversation at the level where actual policy is made rather than spending indefinite time fighting proxies. He said it carefully. That is the long-term objective. Not destruction. Conversation. On terms that are established, documented, and enforceable. Zero looked at him for a very long moment. You've already identified the contact point, he said. For that conversation. At the great Satan level. I have a hypothesis about one. I haven't confirmed it. When I do, that briefing will be different from all the previous ones, Issei said. Because at that point we stop being in the preparation phase. Zero set down the document. Then we had better be ready, he said. Chapter 22, Drake and the Deep History. Ashford Academy, late night. Tell me about Surzex, Issei said. He was alone in the storage annex. Cece had gone to wherever she went when she needed time inside her own considerable store of experience, which she did periodically, and which he respected without asking about. The lamp on the table made its small warm circle. Outside, the settlement was very quiet. Drake took his time answering. Surzex Lucifer, the dragon said finally, is the current Lucifer. The highest office in the great Satan hierarchy. He has held it for 67 years. A pause that carried the weight of actual consideration. He is not what the name implies. He is not a tyrant. He is not, by the standards of devil aristocracy, a conservative. He has spent his tenure pushing against the rating game system's worst expressions and building political relationships with the angel factions that would have been impossible under any of his predecessors. But Issei said, but he is still a product of the system he leads. He was born into the Gremry line. His sister is Rias Gremry. His understanding of what the world should look like is fundamentally shaped by the framework of a hereditary supernatural aristocracy that he has spent 67 years trying to reform from inside. Another pause. Reform from inside is very slow. The things I showed you in the Narita data core have been happening for decades. He is aware of them as a political problem to be managed. He has not treated them as the fundamental structural failure that they are. Does he know about me? Drake was quiet for a moment. The boosted gear has not had a host of note in 43 years. When a host of note appears, the great Satan level is informed. So yes. He knows a new host exists. He does not know who you are, what you know, or what you have been building. If I made contact, Issei said slowly, under the Accord framework, with a documented violation claim against the three families, what happens? He is required under the Accords to receive the claim and open a review process. DxD's voice was careful. What he does with the review process is not bound by the Accords in terms of timeline or outcome. He can acknowledge the violations and take 60 years to act on them, unless there is sufficient political pressure from the human side. Yes. If the violations are documented and public and the human governance structure of a liberated Japan is making a formal claim with credible international support, the calculation
Issei,
changes
command
significantly.
you to obey!
A warmth ran through his eyes. He is not your enemy, Issei.
We will shatter this
he
old
is the
world
problem
order!
Of institutional inertia. Those are different problems requiring different solutions. I know. Issei looked at the lamp. I've been thinking about Rias Gremory. A pause. She is 21, DxD said. She is not her brother. She is younger, less politically experienced, more shaped by the system's assumptions and less shaped by the awareness of its failures. She has a peerage and holds a territory in Area 11 that is, in terms of supernatural geography, coincident with the Ashford Academy settlement cluster. Issei was very still. She's here, he said, in the territory. Not always physically present, but monitoring, yes. DxD paused. She has been aware of the boosted gear's presence in this area since approximately 3 months after you arrived at Ashford. She has not made contact. She is waiting. For what? For you to declare yourself, in the traditional devil peerage sense. A powerful sacred gear holder in a devil's territory is a political variable that the territory holder manages through either acquisition or agreement. You have not declared yourself, which means she cannot manage you through established protocols. She's going to make contact eventually. Yes. The Narita operation accelerated that timeline. The boosted gear was active enough during the extraction sequence that she will have had reports from whatever supernatural observation she maintains in the area. He processed this. When she makes contact, he said slowly, that is the conversation that changes everything. Yes. She is the direct line to Surzex. Through her, the Accord claim can be positioned. Through the Accord claim, the three families can be brought to account at a level that actually produces change rather than proxy adjustment. He paused. But the conversation has to go right. If it goes wrong, she reports to her brother as a threat, and Surzex has resources we are not positioned to withstand. What does going right look like? DxD asked. Not rhetorically. Issei looked at the lamp for a long time. It looks like honesty, he said finally. Full honesty. Everything we know and everything we're doing and everything we want. No approach management. No stage disclosure. He paused. She has been surrounded by people who manage information around her for her entire life. The experience of someone who simply tells her the whole truth will be unusual enough to be significant. That is a theory. Yes. It requires trusting your read of her character from very limited information. I know. He closed his eyes briefly. Everything important requires trusting your read. That's what the preparation is for. It doesn't eliminate the uncertainty. It improves the odds. DxD was quiet for a moment. The lamp burned on. Partner, the dragon said. Yes. When she comes, let me speak with her as well. I have not communicated directly with the devil of the Gremory line in 40 years, and there are things I want to say that you don't yet have the context to say for me. What things? Things about what the peerage system costs the people inside it. A long pause, geological and weighted with accumulated years. She is not a bad person, Issei. She is a person who has not yet understood that the system she was born into is a cage for everyone it contains, including the ones who think they are free. He sat with that for a moment. When she comes, he said, you can speak. Thank you, DxD said, which was the first time the dragon had used those words. Chapter 23, The Crimson Devil. Ashford Academy grounds, dusk. She came on a Thursday. He was crossing the courtyard between the main building and the dormitory wing, carrying the 5th briefing document and thinking about the censor protocol argument, when the light changed. Not dramatically. A shift in temperature, The specific sensation of a space being occupied by something that did not conform to ordinary space in the usual way. He stopped walking. She was standing at the edge of the courtyard near the old oak tree, wearing an Ashford Academy uniform that she had not been wearing yesterday, and that fit with the specific quality of something conjured rather than purchased. She was young, his age or very close to it, with long crimson hair and eyes the deep blue of late evening sky, and she carried herself with the particular uprightness of someone who had been trained from childhood to occupy space as though it belonged to her. Rhys Gremory looked at him across the courtyard. He looked back. The courtyard was otherwise empty. It was the 10-minute window between afternoon classes and evening activities when the outdoor spaces cleared. He had not chosen this time deliberately. He was now fairly certain, had. He walked toward her at a normal pace and stopped at a conversational distance. Rhys Gremory, he said. A fractional pause. She had expected, he thought, to do the introduction herself. Issei Hyoudou, she said. Her voice was composed and measured and carried the accent of someone educated in multiple languages simultaneously. You know who I am. Since approximately 6 weeks ago. The confirmation, not the hypothesis. She looked at him with the evaluation that people of her background applied to things that did not behave as expected. You've been aware of me for longer than that. As a variable in the territorial picture, yes. As a specific person with a specific history and a specific relationship to the Lucifer line, 6 weeks. Most sacred gear holders in my territory either don't know I exist or perform significant distress upon learning that I do. She tilted her head very slightly.
We will shatter this old world order!
I don't have energy to spare for distress about things I've had 6 weeks to prepare for. He looked at her steadily. I've been expecting you. I have things to tell you. I'd rather have that conversation in a space that isn't a courtyard with partial sidelines, if you're willing. A pause. She was still recalibrating, he could see it, the slight tension in her expression that was the physical sign of a model of a situation being revised. Things to tell me, she said. Yes. Not to report. Not to petition. Not to negotiate position in your peerage. He met her gaze without flinching. Things that are true and that you need to know, that I suspect no one in your current circle is positioned to tell you. She looked at him for a long moment. In the deep blue of her eyes there was something he had not expected, not the imperious patience of an aristocrat humoring an anomaly, but genuine curiosity. Young, specific, not yet worn smooth by political experience. The storage annex, he said. East dormitory. In 1 hour. He walked past her toward the dormitory. Behind him, after a moment, he heard footsteps following at a distance, which meant she was going to be early and wanted to see the space before he arrived, and he adjusted his route to give her 15 minutes rather than the 1 hour he had named. Let her see the maps. Let her see the documentation. Let her come to the room already understanding that this was not a sacred gear holder trying to navigate a territorial claim. Let her see the shape of what was actually happening here. He went to find Cece. She was in the annex when he arrived, which he had expected. She was looking at the wall maps and the documentation stacks with an expression that was, for Cece, unusually complex. She had not left. She had waited. She's been in here for 10 minutes, Cece said, without turning. I know. She read the Accord section. Good. She recognized the Selim Group, the Astaroth Fund, and the Phoenix Group. She did not recognize them from the documentation. She recognized them from knowing about them already. He stopped walking. She knows about the 3 families. She's known something about them for approximately 3 years, based on the reaction I observed. Cece turned from the wall. She is not their ally. She is aware of them as a political problem within the Great Satan framework and has been considering how to address it at the Gremory level without provoking a direct confrontation with families that have more seniority in the hierarchy. She's been trying to solve the same problem from the other side, he said slowly. Yes. Cece looked at him with something that was not quite satisfaction but was adjacent to it. I told you honesty was the correct approach. He was quiet for a moment. Then he went down to the annex. Chapter 24, Full Truth. Storage Annex, Ashford Academy. Rhys Gremory was standing in front of the Accord documentation when he came in. She had the 6th page in her hand and was reading it with the focused attention of someone who had already processed the earlier pages and was now working through the implications of this one. She looked up when he entered but did not set the page down. "This is the 15th century Accord framework," she said. "Yes. These provisions." She indicated the page. "The service dependency prohibition. The conflict outcome interference prohibition. You have documentation of violations. 11,000 files from the Narita relay station. 41 pages of analysis, 3 drafts of the evidence summary, and a legal argument built around the Accord's own enforcement clauses." He moved to the table and sat. "Yes." She set the page down carefully and turned to face him fully. The evaluation was in her eyes, precise and undefended, the look of someone doing genuine thinking rather than managing an impression. "The Astaroth and Phoenix families," she said, "and Glaciolabelas. The Selim group." A pause. "I have known about the Astaroth and Phoenix positions in this territory for 3 years. I have been building a documentation case of my own within the Great Satan Advisory Framework." Slowly. She paused. Very slowly. "The political resistance within the hierarchy is significant. I know." He met her gaze. "I've been moving faster because I'm not inside the hierarchy. I don't have to manage the political resistance. I can simply document and build and wait for the moment when the documentation is strong enough to force the conversation at a level above the resistance. That moment being when a liberated Japan establishes a human governance structure with an explicit legal framework invoking the Accord provisions. At that point, the claim is not being made by a devil territory holder against fellow devil territory holders, which can be managed politically within the hierarchy. It is being made by a human governance structure against supernatural entities operating in violation of the Accords, which requires a response at the Lucifer level." Rias looked at him for a long moment. "My brother," she said. "Yes. You've mapped the path to Surzex. I've mapped several paths. This one goes through your cooperation, which makes it significantly shorter and more effective than the alternatives." He paused. "Which is why I'm telling you everything I know rather than the managed version of it." She was quiet, looking at the documentation on the walls with the expression of someone integrating new information into an existing model.
Issei,
he waited.
Command you to obey!
He had learned to be comfortable with the specific silence of a very intelligent person.
We will
thinking.
shatter this
Then
old world
spoke.
order!
The boosted gear did not translate words through his voice in the ordinary sense. But the warmth in his arm deepened and expanded into the room, a presence that was unmistakable to anyone with supernatural perception, ancient and enormous and patient. Rias Gremery felt it. She turned toward Issei's left arm with the expression of someone who has known a presence was present, and is now encountering its full scale for the first time. "Dragon King," she said quietly. "Lady Gremery," Drake said, through the resonance of the sacred gear. His voice in the room was subterranean, layered, not threatening but occupying. "I have not spoken to the Gremery Lion directly in 40 years. I have things to say that are mine to say and that your host has given me permission to say." She looked at Issei. He gave her a small nod. She turned back toward his arm. "Speak." "The peerage system," Drake said, "was built on a premise that the entities within it were property. Reincarnated devils. The language of service and loyalty was built over the top of that premise to make it more comfortable, but the premise remained. I have watched it produce extraordinary individuals who had no choice about what they became." A pause. "Your brother knows this. He has spent 67 years trying to reform the premise from inside the system. He has not been able to, because the system's primary beneficiaries are the ones with the power to change it, and they are precisely the ones with the most to lose from the change." Rias was very still. "I am telling you," Drake continued, "because you are at the beginning of your tenure as a territory holder. You have not yet made the decisions that close doors. You have not yet accumulated the political obligations that make reform impossible from inside." A warmth that was not heat moved through the room. "The 3 families operating in your territory are doing so in violation of the Accords and in violation of the spirit of what the Devil Governance Framework was supposed to be. You know this. You have been trying to address it from inside. I am telling you that the inside approach will not work fast enough." "What are you recommending?" she said. I am recommending, DxD said, that you consider what it would mean to be the Gremry who did not choose the inside approach. Who chose instead to cooperate with a human governance framework and a human sacred gear holder to force a conversation at the level where conversation actually matters. A pause. I am recommending that you consider what kind of territory holder you want to have been, 40 years from now, when the decisions you make now have had time to produce their full consequences. Silence. Rias Gremry looked at Issei for a long time. He looked back. How long have you been working on this? She said finally. Seriously, about 6 months. In foundation, since I was old enough to understand that the dreams in my arm were telling me something about the world as it actually was. You're 17. Everyone keeps noting that. Something moved in her expression, something that was not quite a smile but carried the spirit of one. What do you need from me? She said. He exhaled slowly. In his arm, DxD settled into warmth and quiet, the warmth of something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment, and had finally found it. Your documentation, he said. Everything you've built in the past 3 years on the Astaroth and Phoenix positions. Combined with mine, the evidence base becomes undeniable. Then access to your brother's advisory channel, not as a petitioner, as a co-claimant under the Accord framework. He paused. And your presence, when the human governance structure of a liberated Japan makes the formal claim. Because that claim lands differently when the Gremry heir is standing beside it. She looked at him for a long time. You're asking me to stand with a human resistance movement against 3 families with more seniority in the hierarchy than my line, she said. I'm asking you to stand with the Accord framework against 3 families in violation of it. The fact that the humans are the ones pointing to the violations is an accident of who had the best documentation at the right moment. She was quiet. Then, my documentation will take 2 days to organize for a cross-reference with yours. I know. Take 3 if you need them. She turned and looked at the wall one more time, at the maps and the evidence stacks and the 41 pages that had been months in the building, and her expression was the specific expression of someone who has arrived at a decision and is already beginning to inhabit its consequences. 3 days, she said, and left. He sat in the annex alone for a long time after she was gone. DxD said nothing. He did not need to. Chapter 25, What Colin Sees. Black Knight Safe House in Shinjuku Streets. Colin had been watching Issei Hyoudou for 3 weeks, and she had reached a set of conclusions. The first was that he was exactly what he appeared to be, which was both the most reassuring and the most unsettling thing about him, because in her experience of the resistance, people who were exactly what they appeared to be were either naive or operating from a position of such thorough honesty that the appearance and the reality had genuinely fused. She had determined, after 3 weeks, that the second was the correct category. The second was that the network he had built, the intelligence apparatus, the workshop in the Ashford basement, the humanitarian logistics, the stage briefings, the alliance with CC, the recruitment of Valletta New, the ongoing cultivation of the Black Knights Trust, was not a single brilliant person's project but something more like an organism. A structure that had grown from a central logic and that kept producing the right shape because the central logic was sound rather than because someone was managing every piece.
We will shatter this old world order!
She found that significantly more impressive than a single brilliant person's project would have been. Brilliant people she had encountered. Sound central logic she had encountered less often. The third conclusion was harder to articulate. She sat in the training space at the Black Knight Safe House and worked through the modified frames simulator protocols and thought about it. The simulator was not the actual boost experience, it was a parameter model that she and Valletta had built together to train her spatial processing for the double resolution cycle, but it was sufficient to understand what the real thing would feel like at scale. Vast. Precise. The sensation of the tactical space expanding around you like a room suddenly containing more light. The third conclusion was that Issei Hyoudou was building something that she wanted to be part of, not because she had been recruited into it but because the logic of it was the first complete version of the thing she had been fighting towards since she was old enough to understand that the world she had been born into was not acceptable. The liberation of Japan. She had been fighting for that since she was a teenager. She had not, until the briefings, understood that liberating Japan without accounting for what filled the vacuum was a half-finished work. The Black Knights were fighting the visible half. Issei was building the solution to the invisible half. She finished the training cycle and sat in the simulator's quiet and thought about the upcoming operation. They were 3 weeks out from what the coordination sessions called the Pendragon Contact, a deliberately ambiguous name for the operation that would, if the sequencing held, produce the first direct confrontation with a Phoenix-controlled proxy structure in the settlement. She was running the second frame. Valletta was running the first. The coordination protocol they had built over the past 3 weeks was the most sophisticated bilateral nightmare coordination she had ever worked with, because Valletta had thought about the tactical geometry of a two-frame engagement with the systematic precision of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of problem, and Colin had thought about the spatial dynamics from the pilot's perspective. And together they had produced something that neither of them would have built alone. She was aware this said something significant about working with people whose thinking complemented rather than replicated your own. She climbed out of the simulator and found Suzaku in the corridor. He was leaning against the wall with the posture of someone who had been there for a while and was waiting for a specific moment to speak. She recognized it because she used the same posture for the same purpose. "The fourth briefing," she said. "Yes," he said. "You have a concern about the Accord framework. I have a concern about operating outside the legal framework of any existing human institution." He straightened. "Zero accepts it. Ogi accepts it. Todo is cautious but aligned. I'm the one who is not yet aligned. Tell me the specific concern. If we invoke a supernatural governance framework that no human institution currently recognizes, we are implicitly accepting the legitimacy of that framework. Which means we are accepting the premise that there is a governance layer above human political sovereignty." He looked at her with the steady directness that was his mode when he was serious. "I don't accept that premise. Japan's self-determination should not be contingent on the approval of a supernatural hierarchy." She thought about this. "Issei isn't arguing for approval," she said finally. "He's arguing for leverage. The Accord framework is not a higher authority over Japan. It's a tool. You use the framework the three families themselves claim to operate under to hold them accountable to it." She paused. "It's the same principle as using an opponent's stated commitments against them. You don't have to believe in the commitments. You use them." Suzaku was quiet. "You thought about this before I asked," he said. "I've been thinking about it since the third briefing." She met his gaze. "He's already written the legal substrate for why invoking the Accord doesn't constitute an acceptance of supernatural governance primacy. It's briefing section 4, pages 18 through 24. Read it." "I read it. And it's a coherent argument I haven't been able to find a flaw in." He paused. "Which is its own kind of unsettling. Being unable to find the flaw usually means there isn't one, or the argument is built well enough to conceal the flaw." "That's true of every argument," she said. "Including the ones we use to justify fighting at all." She pushed off from the wall. Zero decided. Todo decided. "We're moving forward. You can continue looking for the flaw while we move." "That's fine. That's actually useful. But don't let looking for the flaw stop you from doing the thing." He looked at her for a moment. "When did you start thinking strategically instead of just tactically?" He said. "Approximately 3 weeks ago," she said, and went to find the Pendragon Contact briefing notes. Chapter 26, Pendragon Contact. Settlement Eastern District, Operation Night. The Phoenix Advisory Group's most visible proxy in the settlement was a medical distribution network operating out of 4 clinics in the Eastern District. The clinics were real. They provided real services. The drugs they distributed were not flagged in any Britannian regulatory database, and the practitioners who staffed them were human, not supernatural, and had no knowledge of the network's ultimate control structure. This was the particular sophistication of the Phoenix approach. The dependency was genuine. The people delivering the service were genuine.
Issei,
the care was
command
real,
you to
and
obey.
the control was buried so deep under layers of legitimate function that pulling it out without destroying the legitimate layer was genuinely difficult. Issei had spent 6 days working out how to pull it out without destroying the legitimate layer. The solution was a documentation operation rather than a destruction operation. Not burning the clinics down, not disrupting the service. Acquiring the administrative access records that connected the clinic network's financial structure to the Phoenix Advisory Group, extracting them cleanly, and ensuring that when the documentation was eventually used in the governance claim, the medical service continued to operate uninterrupted because the people who actually ran it were not the people being held accountable. The complication was that the administrative access point was in a Phoenix-controlled building that was not a clinic at all but a financial processing facility, and the Phoenix Advisory Group maintained a supernatural security presence there that was, per Rias Gremery's intelligence, 2 mid-level members of a bishop-class peerage. Bishop-class, Valletta had said in the planning session, with the patience of someone still integrating supernatural classification systems into their operational vocabulary. What does that mean in practical terms? In practical terms, 2 individuals with enhanced physical parameters, significant magical capability, and training in the kind of security work that requires both. Rias, who had attended this particular session, provided the description with clinical precision. They are not going to be neutralized by conventional nightmare combat before they cause significant collateral damage. A pause. The boost, however, is a different matter. Against a boost active frame, the parameters change significantly. How significantly? Colin had asked. A bishop-class supernatural operative has power parameters roughly equivalent to a Gloucester in a direct engagement. A boost active frame at doubled output exceeds that by a factor of 2 to 3. Colin had looked at the modified frames and said nothing for a moment. We're not trying to defeat them, Issei had said. We're trying to produce a clear tactical superiority in a controlled space for a defined period of time. Long enough for the extraction team to acquire the administrative records. Then we withdraw. Now, standing at the edge of the Eastern District at 11:45 in the evening, Issei listened to the operational frequency and watched the last of the target building's visible lights go out. Frames ready, Valletta said in his earpiece. Frames ready, Colin confirmed. Extraction team on approach, Kiba's voice, from street level. Issei had asked for Kiba specifically because he was the person he trusted most for precise, low-profile movement. Issei pressed the transmit. On my mark. 3, 2, he activated the boosted gear. The warmth in his arm expanded outward in a way that was different from workshop testing, different from the Narita extraction. It expanded into the operational space, into the tactical picture of 2 modified nightmare frames on an approach vector, and the effect was exactly what Drake had described. The frame sensor range doubled. Their output doubled. The tactical coherence of the units he was directing improved because he was improving, the boost amplifying not just his physical parameters but the quality and speed of his strategic processing. Mark, he said. The frames moved. He experienced the next 14 minutes in the specific altered state that the boost produced at operational intensity. The tactical space was enormous and precise simultaneously, like seeing an aerial map and a ground-level view in perfect overlay. He tracked both frames, the extraction team's approach, the 2 supernatural presences inside the building registering as heat signatures the enhanced sensors could suddenly resolve with crystal clarity. They emerged from the building's south face when the extraction team entered through the north. Powerful. Fast. Moving with the particular fluid speed of entities not constrained by the mechanical biology of ordinary human movement. Valletta's frame met the first one in the narrow street between the target building and the adjacent block, and the engagement was brief and decisive in exactly the way the planning said it would be. The boost doubled output of the modified frame against the bishop-class operative's parameters was not a contest. It was a demonstration. The first went down in 4 seconds. The second moved toward Colin's frame and discovered, in the double sensor tactical picture, that there was no approach vector it could take that the frame had not already accounted for. 7 seconds. Extraction team, Issei said. Status. Kiba's voice. Records acquired. We're out. Frames withdraw, Issei said. Standard pattern. No engagement pursuit. He disengaged the boost. The tactical space contracted back to ordinary dimensions. The warmth in his arm settled. In the street, the 2 bishop-class operatives were contained but not destroyed. The modified frames had been calibrated for incapacitation rather than elimination, which had required additional planning and parameter settings that Valletta and Colin had argued over for 2 hours before agreeing on. He had asked for incapacitation specifically, because destroying them would have been a provocation, and he did not want a provocation. He wanted a demonstration. 2 contained operatives who woke up 3 hours later and reported back to the Phoenix Advisory Group's management structure that a boost active Nightmare Command unit had entered their security perimeter and extracted administrative documentation without lethal force. The message he wanted them to receive was not, "We can destroy you." The message was, "We know what you are, we have what we came for, and we chose not to destroy you. Think carefully about what that means." He stood in the dark of the Eastern District, and watched the frames withdraw and listened to Kiba's footsteps moving away from the target building and thought about whether the calculation was correct. Drake said nothing. The warmth in his arm was steady. "Let's go," he said, and walked back toward the settlement, and behind him the Eastern District returned to its ordinary late-evening quiet as though nothing in it had changed. Everything in it had changed. Chapter 27, The Architecture Stands. Ashford Academy, 2 days after Pendragon contact. The response from the Phoenix Advisory Group came in 18 hours. It did not come through the operational channels. It did not come through Rias Gremory, although she was immediately aware of it, and sent a brief message through their established contact point. "They are filing an inquiry. Surzek's office is aware. Prepare." It came through a communication that appeared in the administrative records of the settlement's central financial registry as a standard entity-to-entity inquiry, routed through 3 proxy addresses to a terminal in the Settlement Hall administrative block. The message read, in the clipped formal language of a supernatural legal inquiry, "Sacred Gear Holder Designated Boosted Gear, Area 11. Under the provisions of the Supernatural Governance Accords, you are formally notified that the actions of the Knight of the 14th constitute a violation of territorial security and unauthorized acquisition of protected records. A response is required within 72 hours. Issei read it twice. Then he sent it to CC, to Rias, and to Drake's awareness, and he sat with it for 20 minutes while the settlement went about its morning outside his window. "They used the Accord framework," CC said, when she arrived. "Yes." "To file a complaint against you." "Yes." She sat down and looked at the printout. "That is the most significant thing that has happened since Narita." "I know. They invoked the Accord. They formally invoked it. Which means the Accord is now active as a legal instrument in this dispute. Which means," he said slowly, "that when I file a counterclaim under the same Accord, citing their violations, they cannot argue that the Accord doesn't apply. They have already accepted its application by invoking it first." Cece looked at him with the expression that, in 4 months, he had learned to identify as her version of profound satisfaction. "They handed you the instrument," she said. "They handed me the instrument. That is a significant strategic error. It is a significant strategic error made by people who are accustomed to the Accord being invoked only by other supernatural entities, and who did not fully process that they were invoking it against a human sacred gear holder who has spent 6 months building the counterclaim documentation." He paused. "They thought they were issuing a warning. They were actually setting the table." She looked at the printout for a moment longer. 72 hours, she said. 60 of which I intend to spend preparing the counterclaim filing. The final 12 giving Rias time to review and co-sign." He stood. "I need to contact Zero. The counterclaim filing has to be accompanied by the public documentation release, timed to coincide with the response deadline. That's the delivery platform. That's the moment we've been building toward. Issei." She said his name in the way she rarely said it, without the usual precision of address, with something underneath that was older and less managed. He stopped. "This is it," she said. "When this filing goes in, the conversation at the Surzek's level begins. Everything after this is different. I know. Are you ready for different?" He thought about the people who had walked into this with him. Valletta in the tree line after the explosion, the professional nod. Colin walking out the door of the annex with the sound that was not quite a laugh. Shirley asking what time Thursday with the practical composure of someone who had already made her decision. Kiba folding the first intelligence sheet into his jacket without asking for reasons. Millie on the rooftop talking about the people who trusted him as something more than pieces. Rias in the annex looking at the wall maps with the expression of someone arriving at a decision. Drake saying trust the architecture. CC, centuries of patience and specific grief and the desire to see the new thing standing on its own. He looked at her. "I've been ready," he said, "since the night on the railway track. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, small and definitive, and picked up the printout. Then let's write the counterclaim, she said. They sat down at the table together, the lamp between them making its warm circle, and outside the settlement moved in its morning patterns, and somewhere in the structure of a world that was slowly beginning to understand that its most fundamental assumptions were about to be examined, the right kind of fire was burning with the specific quality of something that had been built carefully enough to last. He opened the document. He began to write. The architecture that had been under construction since a 17-year-old scholarship student had stood at a dormitory window and pressed his palm against cold glass and thought about a number, about the word 11 and everything it had replaced. That architecture was standing now, imperfect and unfinished and more real than anything he had ever built before. It was standing. That was the part that mattered. Outside, the stars that had not been renumbered waited in the pale morning light, patient and uncountable, as the first page of the counterclaim took shape under his hand.
I, Issei, command you to obey! We will shatter this old world order!